So, Les, can you let us know when you can see it live on the Facebook page, please?
I can see it live on the Facebook page.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, once you start, I will record.
Yeah.
Good luck, starter.
Yeah, I will start it now. Can I share the screen, Dan? Because yeah. Hello, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and good evening, everyone, from wherever you are joining us from across the world. We're indeed in testing times, and as a result, we have decided from Football Collective to host this online conference to support early career researchers. We're also glad to have Mr. Peter Drury, who is a prominent football broadcaster, with us to deliver a keynote session. So before we started, here are some of the ground rules. So when you join the presentation, please remain muted. Please remain muted when the presentation is on. And please direct your question to the chair of the session via Zoom private chat, who will ask them to the presenters. You can leave and join the conference anytime in the day. However, you will be placed in the waiting room if you are trying to join midway through the conference when the presentation is on. We'll be only let in the conference between presentations, and you can join the Facebook live chat whenever you want. We will be having 3 breaks. One is between 9:45 a.m. to 9:55 a.m. after the keynote. One is between 12 p.m. and 12:55 p.m. for lunch, and one is between 4 p.m. and 4:25 p.m. for tea. During the break, you can either choose to remain in the meeting and network with other presenters and participants attending the conference, or leave the room to take a break. You can join back again once the conference starts. The session will be chaired by, for the keynote session will be chaired by Paddy Ho. The 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. sessions will be chaired by Christina Filippo. The 1 p.m. to 2:40 p.m. session will be chaired by Helen O'Brien. The 2:40 to 4 p.m. sessions will be chaired by Lee Edmondson, and the 4:30 to 6:10 p.m. sessions will be chaired by Eleanor Drywood. All the questions from the conference attendees on Zoom to the presenters should be directed to the respective session chairs via the private chat. And if you are attending via Facebook Live, please post it on the chat and it will be directed through to our chairs by the Facebook admin. For participants, please join the conference at least 20 minutes before the start of the presentation. And you can use PowerPoint, Prezi, and whatever tools you have to showcase your research. Apart from the keynote session, all the participants will be given 10 minutes to present their research, and the chair of the session will warn the participant at the end of 9 minutes via private chat. After the end of 10 minutes, if you will be given a maximum of another 30 seconds to wrap up your presentation, following which you will be put on mute. Thank you. I hope you all enjoy the day. I will now pass on to Paddy Ho, who is the chair for the keynote session, and he will take it on from here.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's brilliant to welcome Peter here today. As someone, I have 26 years in journalism, and Peter's been an ever-present in all that time, starting off in BBC Radio. And you know, unwittingly, Peter, you touch a lot of the bases that the Football Collective is beginning to eke out, as it were, both thinking about the media, but also, you know, things around football governance, computer games, which most of the world knows you about, as an area of study that a lot of people are getting involved in. So we really thank you for coming here today and giving your thoughts and giving us the keynote. And I'll not say much more, but I will reserve the first question when you're finished. So whenever you're ready, Peter, thanks.
Well, thank you, Paddy. And actually, I think you're right to identify questions as a key time, because I've got 15 minutes ahead of me here where I can talk broadly about what I do and about the history of television in the UK. But Mine is not research of the sort that many of the other participants will have lined up for you, and I'd be keen largely to answer any questions you have afterwards. First of all, I've got to say, perhaps on behalf of everyone who's listening in and participating now, thank you to you and to Dan and Sartak and everyone who's had the energy and the foresight and the imagination to lead the Online Football Collective into this particularly nasty bump in humanity's road. These are dreadful times for so many people, but whilst we all accept and endorse the prioritization of health and humanity over everything else, we lean heavily too on those whose hope and creativity is already investing itself in a post-pandemic future. So what is life without some sort of aim and aspiration? Your generation, the cohort on the cusp of breakthrough into our competitive and hard-edged industry, is surely the most frustrated by the suspension of normal life. You're on the point of making your mark and you are stalled. And I dearly hope that when normality returns, you'll have the opportunity to unleash your pent-up creativity and ambition into the world. It's a great privilege for me to have been invited in the company of so much intelligence and potential to launch this day of ideas and expertise. In fact, it's a little daunting to speak to so many whose ambition is presumably to improve upon the industry of which I've been a part for 30 odd years. Moving the vast football industry into the middle years of the 21st century will, I trust, be your business, and the array of topics through which the speakers are going to take this conference over the next 8 or 9 hours suggests that you're not short of good ideas. I'd like to believe that my career has enough years left in it that I'll be able to help with and benefit from your creative energy. But for now, I am content to start your day by placing your work into the context of history. My business, as you say, is football media, in particular broadcast media, in particular these days television. So rather than a dry excursion through the history of televised football, which you can find very easily online anyway, I guess the best thing I can do is to tell the story as I've seen it through the prism of my own experience. I was born in 1967, a year late, the year after England won the World Cup. The 1966 final, still arguably the most dramatic World Cup final ever, remains, according to most sources, the most watched event in the history of British television. Between them, the BBC and ITV claimed a combined audience of 32.3 million. That is a figure most closely challenged, but not beaten, by Princess Diana's funeral in 1997. And it's a figure that reflects the dovetailing, even by then, more than 50 years ago, of A, football as the predominant mass interest sport in this country, B, yes, of course, England's progress in their home competition, but also C, television's place as an accepted and modern medium via which top-level sport, and especially football, had become a shared national experience available to almost everyone. Even before the Second World War, the brand new BBC television service had dabbled in broadcasting football. After the war, and especially once ITV arrived as a commercial competitor, sport developed into a battleground. 1964 brought the introduction of Match of the Day, an iconic brand which remains to this day. It was by no means the first programme of its type, but it has proved the most long-lasting and loved. Naturally, England's 66 success did wonders for the popularity of football. Soon, the various ITV regions united around the Big Match title to rival Match of the Day. And as I grew up through the 1970s, I was one of millions who followed football, principally live on the radio, but also via those famous highlight shows on the television. Because there were only 2 channels in those days, the presenters and commentators became synonymous with the action in a way which actually they never really can now in a multi-channel era. Kenneth Wolstenholme had provided the soundtrack and some unforgettable lines on England's greatest day, and he continued for quite some time, actually. Jimmy Hill, a notable former player, turned out to be a television visionary. Brian Moore, who had commentated for BBC Radio in the 1966 finals, was a much-loved and hugely credible early face and voice for ITV. David Coleman had been and continued to be a totemic sports broadcaster for the BBC. Barry Davis, another iconic voice across a huge range of sports, arrived at the BBC from ITV. And of course, John Motson, possibly the voice of English football, certainly in the pre-satellite years, grew to the point of massive familiarity. These were famous people, and for a young boy growing up with a fascination both for football and broadcasting, they were my stars. ITV and the BBC often went head to head. FA Cup finals back then were not just between the teams, but between the broadcasters. World Cups were also seen as the ultimate showcase of talent and style. Almost invariably through the years, the BBC, as the established national channel with its attached gravitas and position in society, and of course with its absence of commercial breaks, has achieved better viewing figures at World Cups. But ITV, very often the underdog, has been commercially compelled to be creative and, for better or worse, somehow different. And this has sometimes proved inspired, notably and famously in 1974, when Brian Moore chaired ITV's World Cup panel, including some of the great strong opinions of the game, Clough, Malcolm Allison and co. And it was compelling. And in fact, it was the trailblazer for the type of opinion-driven punditry we take for granted today. In those days, World Cups and Cup finals aside, live television football was scarce. The annual England-Scotland game was a big treat, and it was clear that the public appetite was for more. In 1983, ITV was the first to offer a live football match from the old First Division. The 2-year contract for a relatively small peppering of games shared by the two major channels cost what seems now a puny £5.2 million. By 1988, an exclusive 4-year contract with ITV had rocketed to 44 million. It was now clear that live football was of immense value to the television companies. For the BBC, it was a ratings certainty. Likewise for ITV, who were able to satisfy their commercial imperative. Perhaps belatedly also football, which had once been hugely suspicious of television, particularly its potential effect on attendances, was becoming aware of its own worth within the broadcasting sector, and it was all about to explode. England's melodramatic performance at World Cup 1990, Lineker's goals, Gazza's tears, and the pain of a heartbreaking semi-final defeat on penalties, that propelled the players to an even greater level of stardom and whetted further the national appetite for more of the game on TV. Within a couple of years, that appetite was satisfied, or at least partly so. Technology was, as always, advancing, and the advent of satellite television changed the landscape beyond recognition. Sky Sports, as we now know it, was a part of Rupert Murdoch's huge media empire, and seeking to make its mark, recognised how top-level football could work at the very core of its offering. Now, the politics and the machinations of all the negotiating are the stuff of legend. Whole studies, books, theses have been written on that alone. But to cut it all short, in 1992, the Premier League was born, and Sky had the exclusive rights to show it. This was not without its controversy, chiefly because Sky required a subscription. Free-to-air top-flight football had been snatched away. Very few people were at the outset able to watch it. But in the opinion of football's deal brokers, the eye-watering amount of money which Sky was able to pay more than compensated for the initial loss of viewers. Furthermore, Sky showed a determination to innovate with its football coverage. They became cutting edge in terms of technology and match analysis. Their slogan was a whole new ball game, and they meant it. Football, of course, had been through a rough couple of decades. Hooliganism on the terraces, the Hillsborough disaster, Heysel, the Bradford fire. Its reputation was largely in the gutter. Its crowds had dipped, its stadia were outmoded and often grim. It needed rebranding and lifting, and Sky helped it to do that. Its wealth paid for a long overdue upgrade. Over time, the subscription model caught on. Fans began to deal with the notion of paying for the product. It seems odd to say now when we're also used to our monthly direct debit, but it was a new expense then. The effect on the industry was huge. Suddenly, for young aspirants like me in their early mid-20s, there were new windows of opportunity. Sky and their launch rivals BSB, who became merged partners, recruited some of the bright prospects from established television channels and from radio. And at the same sort of time, the BBC started to formulate plans for a new 24-hour news and sport radio station. Now, as a young reporter in BBC local radio, this was all very exciting for me. My next move was to the BBC network in Broadcasting House in London, where I was a founder member of 5 Live and where I had the opportunity to commentate at a national level. It was a great time then to be on national radio. Sky's control over the fixture list meant that there were more standalone games requiring, of course, more commentators, more opportunities. And at the same time, Sky's relatively low subscription base meant that many fans continued to rely on radio for their live football. For the first 15 years of the Premier League up to 2007, Sky had a monopoly on the Premier League, whilst of course extending its rights portfolio much more widely within and outside of football. Except for 3 years with ITV, BBC continued as the highlights broadcaster via Match of the Day. The two principal channels each had spells as the purveyor of the FA Cup, and ITV put a lot of its eggs into the basket of UEFA's new flagship, the European Champions League, a rebranding of the old European Cup. Since then, to put it simply, Premier League football has been beyond the pocket of old-style free-to-air channels. Attempts to compete with Sky have more than once ended in financial catastrophe. ITV Digital's attempt to create a rival platform founded on what most considered an ill-judged and unrealistically expensive deal to televise the Football League. The collapse of that deal impoverished and genuinely endangered many clubs. In 2007, when Sky's Premier League monopoly was deemed unacceptable, Setanta bought a couple of packages, but they went bankrupt in 2009. ESPN took over as junior partner, and since 2013, BT Sport have been the other domestic Premier League broadcaster. BT, having the deep pockets of such a massive company, have proved to be the most durable of the companies attempting to keep pace with Sky, not only having made it now into a third 3-year cycle of Premier League rights, but also having successfully and very expensively prized the Champions League and the Europa League away from terrestrial channels. The intensity of competition and the mushrooming of potential providers has been largely good for those of us within the industry. Personally, I moved from BBC Radio to ITV in 1998 and enjoyed 14 years of being at first the exclusive and then the sole terrestrial Champions League broadcaster. The FA Cup, World Cups, European Championships, and those 3 years as the terrestrial highlights partner of the Premier League. But the end of my time at ITV was in a way reflective of the wider picture. Rights were increasingly expensive and seeping away. The financial landscape had changed. Exclusive contracts for presenters, commentators, and the like were becoming scarcer. For me, necessity was the mother of invention, and I ventured from that relative security into a jungle of opportunities elsewhere. And my greatest good fortune in that context was the increasing globalization of the Premier League, which was setting it up its own production arm. Overseas right holders were becoming increasingly hungry for a piece of the English Premier League action. And whilst for some years there had been a world feed broadcast, at least of the bigger games, now came an opportunity to be out there commentating every weekend on a gripping product and to a huge audience. The 2012 Aguero goal for Manchester City did a magnificent sales job for the Premier League, and I was fortunate to be its overseas commentator that day. 8 years on, the overseas TV rights cost contribute almost as much as the domestic rights to the wealth of the Premier League. And of course, it cuts both ways. Not only is the rest of the world fascinated by the English, but the English obsession with football means that our television companies want even more from abroad. For many years, Sky did a brilliant job of showcasing Spain's La Liga. Much of BT's early years material has been from Germany and France and Italy. And whilst those two most prominent pay TV channels have let slip some of that overseas material, it is generally snapped up by new aspirant platforms. Meantime, TV sport continues to evolve. To some extent, the old model still exists. There remains, particularly on special occasions, collective viewing, the family together on the sofa staring at the box in the corner of the room. But increasingly, we are chasing the internet into a world of phones and tablets and endless individual choice, multiple screens. You decide which match you want to watch and when and how and from which angle. Amazon Prime has entered the mainstream marketplace as a Premier League's right holder. Its launch last December was hailed as a great success. And yet this wasn't really TV. This was streaming, a whole new phenomenon in live sport, which, as connectivity continues to improve worldwide, can only grow. Now, some say television football has reached saturation point, and perhaps they're right. But amongst much else we have learned about ourselves during this pandemic, we've found how much we miss it when it's not there. Thousands extraordinarily tuned into the BBC's live stream of a Korean K-League game when it returned to action last week. The excitement at the promised return of the Bundesliga this weekend has been evident, and the tantalising prospect of a summer full of Premier League action, government regulations permitting, has us all licking our lips. Football on TV has become a fundamental part of our recreational lives. That being the case, and notwithstanding the uncertainty about how a post-COVID world is going to look, I can't help but feel optimistic for those of you who do want to invest your professional lives into television sport. There will be change, and there has been so much already, in terms of technology, production, broadcast style, methods of transmission, rights issues, and any other branch of the business you care to consider. What is possible now was unthinkable a quarter of a century ago. And no doubt what we experience now will feel old-fashioned and outmoded by the time some of you guys are channel directors and senior producers and rights negotiators, presenters, and the commentators of your age. So that has been a whistle-stop race really through history up to this point, but that in a nutshell is how we've got to where we are. And it only remains for me to wish you luck as you prepare to take it to the next level. Thanks, Paddy.
Thanks, Peter. That was brilliant. A real whistle-stop tour from an insider into the recent history of football. I have 3 questions that already come up here, Peter, but I did reserve the right of the chair to ask the first question. And that is, you've been someone who's sought out the new pathway, whether it was going from BBC local radio into network radio into then Radio 5. You're now working on a South African channel. You've worked for FIFA. You've worked across YouTube. You've some, as say, computer games is something that you're very famous for as well. How do you explain the international success story of the English Premier League when Italy or Spain or Germany could equally have been the leagues that captured the world imagination?
That's a really good question, Paddy. And I must say it is down to the determination of the Premier League to achieve that preeminence. And I guess, truthfully, at the core of that is the television deal, or the television deals it has struck. It has made the Premier League into the wealthiest league. And whilst this seems like a sort of facile connection, that has enabled it to have the very best players. It has been the go-to league for the world's players. So whilst it is the English league, it has become the international league. It remains the case that there are still a small peppering of clubs that within Europe players might prefer to go to than any in the Premier League. There's Real Madrid, there's Barcelona, perhaps there's Bayern Munich. But that aside, you know, I think whilst I'm no expert on the finances of football, it is probably a preferable move at the moment for a good international footballer to play for a team in the middle of the Premier League, a Wolves or a Burnley or even now Sheffield United, than it is perhaps to join Milan, you know, because of the prominence of the Premier League, because of the wages they are paid. And truth be told, for all those of us theorists and broadcasters and people who make our living round the edge of this game, the truth is that the stars remain the players. And if the best players want to come to our league will remain the preeminent one.
I think one of the points you just made there is about the numbers of people who make money out of the game. Living as I do in Merseyside, I attend matches at both the big clubs, and it never fails to amaze me to see how big press boxes have become when you go to the match. That when I covered Tranmere in the old second tier in mid 1990s, you know, they were kicking the ball away from in the Premier League. They played Premier League clubs in that time, and you might have had a press box of 40 or 50. The internet age has completely changed just the sheer range or numbers of people that cover football, doesn't it?
Well, that's right. And that's why I think it remains a very exciting industry to be a part of. It remains a hugely competitive industry, but opportunities exist in greater number possibly than they ever have because of that. What is interesting, and Paddy, to be truthful, you probably know more about this than I would, is the blur in the lines between what we would once perhaps in an old-fashioned way have called mainstream and what we call new, or you know, there is a blur between established media and social media, and where one meets the other is a very interesting delineation, which I guess even clubs are having to deal with. Perhaps you'd know about it, as I say, better than me, where a would-be journalist establishes a platform for himself or herself and begins to apply for accredited involvement in football journalism, you know, where does a club say no? What does one have to do to be considered established as opposed to sort of independent and niche? And that's very difficult. There remain, of course, the old newspapers as we once knew them. But it is an industry that's changed so radically because you don't have to read your news, your football news with the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, the Guardian, the Star, the Sun, whatever. You can choose any one of multiple platforms. And that is both exciting and maybe slightly frightening because to make a living out of a new platform is a brave thing to attempt.
Yeah, whenever you see podcasters, independent podcasters being given places in press conferences at clubs, you know that the sea change really has shifted away from the old mainstream media to the new place. Okay, sorry, Peter. Can I ask you? I've got 4 questions here as they're coming in. First question came from the Premier League Museum, and it's a question about governance and your opinion of governance. It's how prepared is Richard Masters, the Premier League chief, for the handling of this chaos, given the fact that until about a year ago, nobody wanted to do that job?
I mean, poor guy, he didn't sign up for this, did he? And I will say this, I am not in any way minded to be critical of those in charge at the moment, not out of particular cowardice, but out of an understanding that they have been thrown into a position which was entirely unforeseeable and is frankly horrendous in terms of governance. As you say, replacing Mr. Scudamore as the boss of the Premier League was in itself a massive ask, and several big names proved reluctant to take it on. He has now taken it on and faces the biggest problem by far of its existence. And I guess it will define him. We will find out how prepared he is to take it on. In the end, the Premier League is made up of 20 rivalrous clubs, each of whom, as we've been seeing over the course of the last few weeks, has its own particular agenda and needs to look after its own interests. To keep those interests coordinated and in some sense moving in the same collective direction is the work of a genius. And if he pulls it off and retains a united, progressive, successful Premier League, after all this, he's done very well.
I suppose in comparison to Scotland as well, which is going through a civil war, the Premier League's doing quite well, isn't it?
Well, it is. It absolutely is. I mean, it's interesting we're having this conversation now, Paddy, because of course this is a critical week in the sort of semi-resolution of this problem, and the Premier League pretty soon is going to have to make up its mind whether it can finish the season, what it's right to do ethically within the context of a much wider and much frankly more important problem than its own problem. How it is right to go about it, and how, if it can't play the football matches, it's going to resolve its season. And I suppose it's only natural that it is caught up in 20 different stories of self-interest. I mean, it must be a little more than a coincidence that it's the bottom 6 clubs who are finding problems with wanting to resolve, with wanting to resume. And who can blame them? People look after themselves in a way. Listen, all I can say to him is good luck.
but it does in an industry that's famously leaky in terms of what gets released to the press and what gets released to broadcasters and you guys. The Premier League has been quite well disciplined in terms of what has made it into the public sphere, in comparison to Scotland, where there is an outright civil war happening now, where the Scottish radio is dominated by this thing happening on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Scotland does appear at the moment to be a basket case, doesn't it? And it's in a terrible state. Its model is, of course, a very complex and fragile one anyway, because it has these 2 monstrously big clubs and the rest, and that has always been a problem for it. I think that the threat to many of the what you might call larger clubs, but still tiny by comparison with Celtic and Rangers, the threat to them is huge. and the structure of the league is critical for them. They rely on their games against Rangers and Celtic for big portions of their income, and indeed their local economies. I remember hearing stories during that period when Rangers were consigned to the lower leagues for various reasons, how fairly major clubs, sort of Kilmarnocks of this world, St Johnstone and so on, the economy around their grounds suffered hugely because they missed the two major paychecks, two of the four major paychecks of every year. Yeah. And so this is a very complex model because Rangers is just one club, but it is one of the two dominant clubs. And again, sorting out that would be horrendous. But you're right, in England, actually the discipline is very good. It's not unreasonable that the chief executives and chairman of various clubs have a voice and are able to articulate their argument. But actually, in fairness, even to those who might be considered to some extent in a very minor way a little rebellious at the moment, even their discipline is reasonable, and they make their points within a fair context. And actually, you're right. Very little comes out of these Premier League meetings that they wouldn't want to come out of them.
Yeah. Les Crank, who's one of the people who organised this conference along with Sartak and is very active on social media, has asked a really interesting question in terms of broadcasting, which is, why does Sam Chisholm not get the coverage that he should do whenever we come to talk about, you talked about Sky being the great innovator. You know, we don't actually talk about the great innovators within that company and what they did in the game.
Well, no, that's true. I mean, I wasn't sort of there at the very start of Sky, but you're right. I mean, Sam Chisholm is one of those legendary names that you hear mentioned. And there are probably actually plenty who were, as it were, the power behind his button. And button is probably a pertinent word because Sky came up with lots of buttons to press, you know, and they did brilliant things. And you know, actually during this lockdown, there's been a lot of nostalgic football on the television, hasn't there? Yeah. You know, games you can watch from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and games which feel relatively recent to me. You put on and you think, wow, look at what has happened in just 20 years in terms of television coverage. The points of difference are huge. And back in, well, I watched a game as many would have done from Euro 96 last night. England against Switzerland was on ITV4, the opening game of Euro 96. And you think, well, you know, these were just guys pointing cameras at a game of football. And at the time, it was state of the art and as it should be and all of that. But the innovation has been extraordinary. And you're right. I mean, Sam Chisholm and the start of Sky Sports was what it was all about. Because in that time, as I did identify, Sky muddied the patch for a lot of people. Sky took away the live games we'd been enjoying on ITV and BBC. Sky made it, Sky was a pain in the neck to the establishment and B, to many supporters. It's funny now because we all accept that Sky is football and football is Sky. But at the start, we were irritated because suddenly somebody was asking us to pay and somebody was moving the kickoff times. And, you know, it wasn't what we really wanted. And so Sky had to work very, very hard at proving in a way it was worth the hassle. You know, it had to do something bigger and better than it had ever been done before. And over a period of time, great credit to Sam Chisholm and many, many others, it achieved that. Now, listen, we can still moan about Sky, and football supporters do, because it moves the kickoffs and it tells Bournemouth to go to Newcastle at 12:30 on a Saturday or vice versa. And it does things we might not like, but it does also pay a huge amount of money, which did enable football to modernize in terms of its stadia and so much else. And it took television production of football to a completely new level.
I know we've only got you for another 5 minutes if we're lucky, if we can push you. So I'll combine two questions from Joe Welford and Robin Ireland. First one is, do you think that Joe's asking, you know, all of the debate around the return of football is around the TV contracts having to be fulfilled? So first question from Joe is, you know, is football now unduly under the control of television? And moving that a wee step further, Robin Ireland saying, with the Bundesliga starting earlier than other leagues, is there a risk that the Premier League might fall behind, or that the Bundesliga may steal some audience from the Premier League?
Two really good questions. the one on the Bundesliga I'll take first. I must say I've thought that. I've wondered that. And I worry that that sort of dynamic might unduly affect the thinking of administrators in any given country. You know, let's get us on and we can show our product to the world while no one else is rivaling it. I hope that's not the case, but the Bundesliga has a very exciting season actually ongoing. It has a really good title race. It has some very good players, not least some players of interest to the English. It's going to have its moments in the sunshine. You know, the BT, I would think, is very, very excited that the Bundesliga is going to get viewing figures the like of which it hasn't had before. I think that's an interesting one and worth keeping our eye on, and we'll only discover as the story unfolds. As for football's influence over football and the restart, television's influence over football and the potential restart, I think it's unarguable that influence is absolutely huge. And you can perceive that as you choose. At one end of the argument, you can say that football sold its soul to television. If you are disdainful of that relationship, it's not difficult to be disdainful because television is football's paymaster, certainly at the very top level. It's interesting, you know, Accrington Stanley don't want to restart, do they? Because for them, playing with no supporters going through the turnstile costs, and they can't afford that cost, and they're just one of many. But at the top end, television pays for it. So you can resent that, or you can see the advantages which over the last quarter of a century have come as a result of it. But what it does mean is that in this unforeseeable set of circumstances, the debt that football feels, or in fact literally owes to television, is one that needs to be paid. And it's just, well, not just one more factor. It is perhaps the major factor in determining what happens next.
If you could predict the future, would you see the future as being a pay-per-view Amazon model where you'll be streaming any game that you want, as opposed to the current model, which is curated, I suppose, or scheduled by Sky or similar broadcasters?
Yeah, that's really interesting. It depends for how long and how profoundly Sky wants to keep being the sort of chief purveyor of football. I mean, let's face it, Sky's whole business model has lent on Premier League football, and without it, Sky would not be what it currently is. As simple as that. You know, with the latest negotiations, it became clear that Sky without the Premier League was desperate. So it did everything it could to ensure that it remained the main broadcaster of the Premier League. And truthfully, the same is true now of BT and the Champions League. When the Champions League came up for grabs, there were all sorts of scare stories from BT's point of view about it going elsewhere. BT had to pull out every stop because without the Champions League, there ain't enough on BT for people to subscribe. And so here are the two, what we would now call preeminent football broadcasters, each with a property that they can't afford to lose. But that doesn't mean that eventually they won't lose it, because eventually Amazon, who were launched very, very successfully last December, people were not certain it would work, but broadly speaking, people were happy that it did work, you know, and it did give that flexibility, and it did mean that you didn't have to watch Manchester United against Tottenham if you'd rather watch Watford against Sheffield United. And that appeals to real fans of real clubs. You know, that was quite warmly embraced, more warmly embraced than I've ever really known for a new launch. Because as I say, when Sky came in, people were skeptical, very skeptical. Any of their potential rivals have been greeted skeptically because people don't like change. But actually, Amazon, it felt to me as though the country was quite ready for that. And so that, with every 3-year cycle, is going to become a bigger and bigger threat to the established broadcasters.
Oh, thanks very much. And showed your old school journalism chops there by landing right on the very button of when you were due to go. Excellent. It's a rare skill, and I'll never lose it. Listen, thanks very much, Peter. We're so glad that you came and you've opened this conference for us, and we wish you every success in the future. Thank you very much. Have a virtual
Paddy, thanks so
clap.
much. Thank you so much, and have a great day. I hope everybody has a really good conference today. It's a great idea. Thank you.
Nice one, mate. Thank you. Okay, so I'll take over to you, mate. We'll go for. Does anybody else want to have any conversations around that, or shall we go for our break slightly early? It's up to you, Sartak.
I mean, we can go for a break slightly early. We will be back in 15 minutes, and then we will be kicking off the day with the 10 a.m. presentation starts. Christina will be the chair for the next session. I guess she is on as well, if we can hear her.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Nice
Yeah, no
one.
worries.
I'll just
Yeah,
unmute.
so everyone can have some tea, coffee, get some fresh air, and we'll be starting back at 10 a.m.
Okay. So Peter. Hi, Peter. Sorry to interrupt into your own time. Can I ask you a question about what you think is going to happen? This is just a personal thing. With the diminishment of BBC local in the coverage of, the rights of BBC, of the BBC rights going to Talk Sport and being divvied up, what do you think that's going to mean for local coverage of sport in terms of radio? And because obviously radio goes online now.
I think that's an interesting one, Paddy. I feel quite a personal connection, really, because I came through Radio Leeds in the early 90s, and BBC local radio used to be the breeding ground. That's used to be where you made your mistakes and learnt and did all of that stuff. And I worry about it because it used to be such a great little academy, actually. I think it'll still remain, but it probably won't remain at the kind of Premier League level, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
It's odd, funnily enough, because I live in Hertfordshire and my local team's Watford. And the guy who does Watford for BBC Three Counties Radio, I was saying to him the other day, it's actually better for the local radio station when a team like Watford, sort of medium, small Premier League team as it is now, is outside the Premier League. Because when it's in the Premier League, it's covered by Sky, it's on Match of the Day, it's on 5 Live, it's on Talk Sport, and people actually don't need the local radio coverage.
Yeah.
Whereas, my 3 sons have all grown up as Watford supporters, and they're all grown up now, but when they were in the middle of the Championship 7, 8, 10 years ago, if there was a Champions League game on in the lounge on the telly, they'd be upstairs listening to Watford against Barnsley and on the local radio station, because there was a demand for it. And I think it's increasing. Like in your neck, Radio Merseyside, the great guys who do Liverpool and Everton home and away, who you all know as I know, and you see in the press rooms, all really good guys, good broadcasters doing a great job. But who's listening to Liverpool against Tottenham on Radio Merseyside when it's on 5 Live or it's on Talk Sport and it's on Sky, and then you see the highlights, whereas maybe Tranmere supporters would appreciate a live commentary on their game away at Plymouth Argyle. Yeah. Because they can't get there.
No, do you think of the great days, when the great days of when I was in press boxes on Merseyside and further afield, if you'd been to Everton or Liverpool, or if at the stage you went to Leeds, you had both the BBC and the local commercial station there.
Yes.
Now the local commercial station isn't there at all because it's owned by Bauer, and they've given up the right to, they don't want to pay for the rights. And a lot of those people who would have been, who would have very close contacts, even inside dressing rooms or inside the boot room, or those sorts of contacts are disappearing, aren't they?
Yeah, without question. That is definitely the case. It's and I think it's a shame, but I always feel like a bit of a dinosaur when I say it, because maybe all I'm saying is that's how it was in my day, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And you're right. I was at Radio Leeds when Leeds won the league, and it was fantastic. And what a great, here was me at the age of 24, 25, getting a fantastic, grounding in sort of big time coverage of a club, but equally covering Bradford City and Huddersfield and Halifax and all of that stuff. And making contacts and all of those good journalistic things, which they can't do. And that, as you say, and to be fair, it was the commercial stations who sort of surrendered first because the rights became too expensive for them. And, music radio is where it's at for them.
Yeah.
And talk radio, whether it's sport or anything, is relatively expensive because it requires people. It doesn't, you don't just put on another disc. It's sounding like something out of the Ark again.
Sorry, we sound like 2 old men, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. But no, I agree. I think it's a real shame. It's a real shame that it's getting marginalised, because you're right. Back in the day, that was part of the scene. You turn up, there would be, Leeds against Liverpool was Radio Leeds, Radio Merseyside, Radio Air.
Yeah,
and
Radio City from Liverpool. So you had 4 really decent outfits.
Yeah, correct.
And they all give footballers. Your mate Jim. I remember I saw Jim regularly at Tranmere.
Yes.
And footballers like him, they got a way into the industry and a proper training. That was almost
Correct.
like a journalistic training, wasn't it?
Correct. That's exactly right. Really good for the the ex-pros who wanted to do it. Then it served a bit of an apprenticeship on in local radio, and yeah, 100% right. In fact, the guy I first started with at Leeds, was Norman Hunter. Funny
Oh,
enough.
God rest him.
Yeah. So bless him, the gentlest and loveliest man. But he, he was one who I think, if he'd chosen to, could have carried on and done television or whatever. But he loved his Leeds too much, so he'd rather get paid buttons to stay at Ellen Road. But that was his choice. But no, you're right. Well, let's face it, local journalism's not in a good place, is it?
Well, my wife works on a local newspaper on the
Really?
Liverpool Echo. I used to work on I was working on the Echo as a freelance until recently, but my wife is the features editor or features design editor on the Liverpool Echo, and where their sales are holding up very well throughout this. But what's going to be left of the industry after this is all over?
Oh.
I wonder, and I also wonder what would have happened if Liverpool didn't have Liverpool and Everton to cover.
Yes. Well, that's massive, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is massive. I mean, because all of us, myself certainly included, if I'm covering a Liverpool game, my first port of call is the Echo, to be honest. And so that does help. And the reliance on the big local clubs is huge. But how that works for the Shropshire Star, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure your Shrewsbury fans do go to it, but and it's also, of course, threatened, as is local radio, by the fact that almost every club now has its own operation. So, if you want to hear commentary on Shrewsbury Town will provide that for you, whereas BBC Radio Shropshire, although actually and again this is part of the model, quite a lot of them unite now.
Yeah.
So actually in my neck of the woods, the guy who does Watford for BBC Three Counties Radio is the same commentary is streamed by Watford as their own. So that's I suppose that's another way of sort of self-protection. Yeah. But,
sorry for butting in there, or sorry for interrupting your quiet time there. I want to talk.
No, not at all. Not at all. I was just about to go and put the kettle on. It's not a big. None of us is hugely busy. It's been nice to have something to work on, actually, to sit at the desk yesterday. What are you doing? I mean, broadly.
I'm marking essays, and I am writing a book at the minute on football. So I'm trying to get interviews transcribed. And no matter how long you are a journalist, Peter, there's nothing worse than transcribing interviews, is there?
boring.
Oh man.
Yeah, great having the conversation.
It is, isn't
it? Yeah. But then transcribe. Yeah, no, I understand that. So how well advanced are you?
Just beginning to write now. I've got 2 chapters done, and I've two more to finish interviews on. So it's basically head down for a year and plow through it. Good on you.
Blimey. Yeah, the process of like everybody, people say, "What about a book? What about a book?" And it overfaces me.
Yeah.
I mean, like you. I mean, you must have had an idea and sort of thought, right, I'm really going to execute this. But it's a big undertaking, isn't it?
Yeah, I've done one already, and I know Sartak and Christina want to jump in here now anyway. But
yeah, no,
the one thing I'll always say about people is, if you want to write a book, only write a book if you necessarily need to. Unless it's essential, don't do it, because it's really not worth the hassle.
I can't believe there is massive satisfaction when the book lands on your desk.
Oh, it's great. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Unless it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, fair point. I can understand that. Just one last question. Is that a French World Cup shirt you're wearing?
That's the Platini shirt from '78, yeah.
78,
I'm a Celtic fan. I realise my mates are watching this and thinking, why is he wearing a Rangers top from the early 90s? But it's actually France '78.
Fair play. Top man.
Nice one.
I better shut up. See you later, Paddy.
See you later, mate. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Well, it was nice in the break to hear Paddy and Peter's conversation. And I will now hand over to Christina, who will take us through the rest of the first session up to lunch. So Christina, over to you. You can go over through the rules once again.
Hi everyone. Welcome aboard. Welcome to those obviously joining now, and welcome to all our participants and presenters. Basic rules: 10 minutes to present. I will send you a personal ping at 9 minutes. So if you're overrunning, just be aware that Sartak has given me the power to mute you if you overrun. So please don't. We'll also take questions at the end. So if those of you can use the chat function, and those of you watching through Facebook Live, we're also monitoring that. So feel free to ask questions on those, and I will kind of pass them on to our presenters. So I think, Sartak, are we good to start? Or shall I?
I mean, we are good to start where you can introduce the presenters who will be presenting, and then from 10 a.m., like sharp at 10 a.m., we will go with the first presenter.
Okay, brilliant. So we've got, obviously we've got quite a few sessions at the moment. So the first session, which I'll be chairing, will have 6 presentations. The first one will be Josh Dean on not for charitable purposes, the state of play in the Premier League's corporate social responsibility management, followed by Arwin Rakshi, a study on the conflict between 2 national football leagues in India, the ISL versus the I-League. Then at 10:40, we're going to have Michael Cole with Populist Tactics, Ramzan Kodyov's use of football as a political tool during the 2018 FIFA World Cup, followed by George Paris's Football and the Working Classes in 19th Century England, followed by Panos Paparigoriou, the feasibility of fan ownership model in the Greek professional football clubs. And then the last presentation of this session will be Michelle Batafi with Why Are We So Good at Football and They So Bad at It? So we've got a nice, good diversity of topics. And then we will continue with, we've got another 3 sessions following this one. So there's lots on. Feel free to follow us all day. Feel free to dip in and out. We will be live on Facebook as well. So if you can't get onto the Zoom, we are also live on Facebook. My Facebook Live is about half a minute behind. So I will be picking up questions, but if I don't ask your question directly, don't worry, we are still picking them up. Okay, Josh, where are you? I can't see you, but I'm sure you're here. There you are. Perfect. We have about 30 seconds, and then you can take us away. There you go. Woo!
Yeah, I'm ready to start now if everyone is.
Oh, all right, take it away. Thank you.
So, hi everyone. It's quite nice to come onto Zoom for something other than a quiz where 20 people are shouting at the same time. I'm around 7 months into a PhD at Sheffield Hallam, working on a thesis titled The Social Impact of Sport and Physical Activity on Crime in England. I just want to say a big thank you to Sartak and to Les for helping put this event together for us early career researchers, and to Peter Drury for supporting the event and for your insights. I'll be looking for feedback and recommendations if possible from the presentation, as it is a paper I'm working on for the Soccer and Society Journal titled A Whole New Ballgame, as Mr. Drury touched upon in his keynote. The proposed aim of this research will critically analyse the ever-growing wealth of the Premier League in the context of redistribution through community initiatives that seek to generate social value. I'll be talking about the key motivations behind corporate social responsibility initiatives and programmes that the Premier League provides, the theoretical framework underpinning the analysis, key examples of corporate social responsibility from the Premier League and how this applies to existing theory, and finally I will conclude before opening the floor to questions and hopefully key recommendations. So what is corporate social responsibility? Fundamentally, corporate social responsibility, which I will also refer to as CSR, is about an organisation or business developing a commitment to building a better society. CSR was first conceptualised by Howard Bowen in 1953 as a fundamental morality in the way a company behaves towards society. And later, we began to understand the interdependency of economic, legal, ethical, and philanthropic responsibilities which were highlighted in Carroll's pyramid of corporate social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility is a unique landscape and thus has received significant attention and theorisation since, within a myriad of contexts, one of those being sport, and more specifically football. There is a wide consensus among scholars that corporate social responsibility has become an important strategic issue, especially in football. But why? Well, as Julian Ottey reminds us, football has a high social and cultural significance, and this would suggest that the Premier League and its member clubs are in a favourable position to deliver corporate social responsibility initiatives, which in turn generate social value and work towards a better society. However, this strategic management has not been without its critics. As McCarthy reminds us, the uniquely globalised and intensified media coverage of football, especially in England, has increased the importance of positive brand image. Naturally, this has developed the question as to whether CSR is merely a tick box exercise or a genuine attempt to generate social value. And regardless of the answer to this question, how does CSR fit into the complex jigsaw that is the profit-driven Premier League enterprise? Well, I think it's important to place the Premier League's corporate social responsibility within the wider context of the English football economy. The late poet and civil rights activist Maya Angelou once said, "If you know your history, the more liberated you are." Well, in 2015, when the Premier League signed a broadcasting deal worth £5.41 billion over a 3-year period, then CEO Richard Scudamore labelled the Premier League a success story but not a charity. Was this an indirect homage to the free market economist Milton Friedman, who, when asked about corporate social responsibility, said the only social responsibility of business is to increase its profit? Well, it might have been, as we fast forward to 2018, when Scudamore left his role as CEO, pocketing a gift, in inverted commas, of £5 million with each of the 20 clubs in the Premier League at the time contributing £250,000 each, a golden handshake covered in controversy. Then we fast forward again to August of 2019, to one of the many examples of financial inequality in football. Bury are expelled from the Football League after 125 years due to ongoing financial and ownership issues. Bury at the time would have been one of the 72 Football League clubs, along with 20 Premier League clubs that offer community engagement, addressing social welfare issues, including but not limited to health, education, crime reduction and inclusion in their local area. Yet, as we were kindly reminded, the Premier League is not for charitable purposes. So, this places the corporate social responsibility landscape of the Premier League in an almost contradictory position. And therefore, we need to understand and critically analyse key motivations to analyse the research. To do this, I'll be using 3 corporate social responsibility theories. Firstly, legitimacy theory, which suggests companies may be seen to establish, maintain, extend or defend things like brand image. Walters and Panton help us to understand this in football by suggesting organisations conduct this through corporate social responsibility. Stakeholder theory suggests that a business or organisation must create value for all stakeholders to be deemed successful. Freeman helps us understand this by defining stakeholders as individuals who can affect or are affected by the achievement of the organisation's objectives, whilst Morrow suggests stakeholder theory has a greater relevance for football organisations, as we've already identified through the cultural and social significance of Julian Ottey's research. And last but not least, institutional theory suggests that corporate social responsibility is delivered within a social framework of norms, values and assumptions about what constitutes appropriate or acceptable behaviour. In simpler terms, for a simple Yorkshireman like me, what is expected of the organisation or business in terms of generating social value from external drivers such as the government. A key example that's well known from the Premier League is the KICS programme. This is a programme funded by the Premier League Charitable Fund with the aim of engaging hard-to-reach youngsters in some of the most high-need areas. For my master's dissertation last summer, I conducted a social return on investment analysis of the Leeds United Foundation's Premier League KICS programme in the Halton Moor estate of Leeds. Halton Moor is an area which is in the bottom 5% most deprived in the country and was in the news last September after a riot broke out in which a police van was torched and 14 youths received injunctions. The evidence gathered from my research supports the findings of many pieces of research around football community programmes such as KICS. Scholars such as Parnell highlight a paucity of evidence upon which Lewinsky suggests positive societal outcomes cannot be accurately attributed to programmes such as KICS. Currently, most evidence comes from clubs or the Premier League directly, yet it is not thorough or transparent. This supports Coulter's notion of vague and unexamined claims about sport's ability to address crime and antisocial behaviour. Therefore, whilst in the macro, a programme such as KICS may be deemed as a positive contribution to addressing social issues such as crime, the value of this investment is, as Coulter notes, vague and unexamined. This research proposes to address whether or not Premier League corporate social responsibility practice, such as KICS, can claim to generate social value. And more importantly, how does this correlate towards my PhD? Well, this is a commonality within all sport and crime research. It's not individual to football. There is currently not enough evidence to offer an accurate estimation of the social value of sport and physical activity in relation to crime and crime reduction, highlighted in the research of my PhD supervisor, Larissa Davies. My PhD will seek to question whether sport is the most cost-effective investment for crime reduction. So, what is the role of professional football? Well, philosopher Julien Bergine, in his book Welcome to Every Town, said, "Perhaps the greatest symbol of the centrality of working class culture to English life is football." Now, of all times, this is a poignant thought. And are we doing enough as academics and fans of the game to ensure that football is taking an active role in fulfilling a social good, such as reducing levels of crime? Currently, I believe we are only scratching the surface of a potentially vital contribution to social value, as after all, the profit of these global TV deals has been generated at the centre of our micro and macro cultures, and this has taken the game to such economic heights. So to conclude, the literature surrounding corporate social responsibility in football suggests it is an effective media exercise to generate legitimacy and conform to institutional norms. However, scholars such as Agnostopoulos argue football widely lacks a commitment to generate social value. Therefore, this research aims to explore the key motivations of the Premier League's corporate social responsibility further through the lens of the theories identified. It will seek to question if these initiatives are doing enough and what the social value of these initiatives are to communities and stakeholders. From today's recommendations and critique, I hope to continue to work on this manuscript and use this as a positive platform to achieve the overarching aim of developing an insight into the key motivations and social impact of the Premier League's corporate social responsibility management. So thank you very much for your attention. In case I don't get the chance, best of luck to everybody else presenting, and I would love it if anyone has any questions or recommendations.
Thanks, Josh. Sorry, it took me a while to find my unmute button there. We do have some questions coming through. You'll be happy to know. So somebody even pipped me to it. So do you think that the EPL clubs are actually contributing to the CSR by asking their players to take wage deferrals?
This is quite a difficult one because it's hard to separate sort of academia from your own opinion, as we are all quite engaged in the game. It's a strange one because if you think it's wrong that other organisations are having to furlough their staff, then it should be the same for football. But there's no transparency about where this money's going from that they're saving. It is good that some clubs like Leeds United, the club I support, are using it to pay other staff. But then if you're looking at the Premier League, I think there's a lack of transparency about where that money's going to. I'd like to see more of a presentation about where that money's going so we could see.
That's great. And do you think, you kind of talked a little bit about the club's responsibility and the Premier League as an organisation. Where do you think the CSR should be coming from? As in, who should be concentrating on it? Should we be looking at it from a league perspective, or should it be the clubs, or should it be what it is at the moment, which is a little bit of both?
Well, this is an interesting question. It's something that I left out of this because I didn't think I'd have enough time. But I found out with my research that programs like KICS are in tiered systems. So as soon as you go up to the Premier League, you'll receive like £100,000 for the KICS program. If you're in tier 2 in the Championship, or if you're a League One side like Sunderland, say, and you apply to be in tier 2, you receive £35,000, but you're allowed to get that matched by external donations. And I think that's quite disproportionate if you look at it. I think there's a lot of clubs outside of the Premier League and in the Championship, like your Leedses, your Sunderlands, maybe Birmingham, that could benefit from more of a fairer funding system and with more money going into these community programs. So I believe that the Premier League could reshape it. I do think it is sort of masked as a media exercise at the moment. And I do question the authenticity of it and if it is genuinely genuine.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. We've got kind of linked to that. We've got a question from Gideon Jakar about what, in your opinion, is the underlying motivation clubs have to invest in such projects and CSR?
Well, that's another interesting one. It's not actually the clubs that fund it. They're funded by the Premier League Charitable Fund, and organisations like the Leeds United Foundation or say Everton in the community, they're not directly funded or they're not directly linked with the club. They just use the club's badge as a sort of a way to get into the community. So I believe that the clubs like this, if you go on any social media around the midpoint of the season where not much is happening, for example, there's a famous one where Dele Alli's walking through sort of a caged football area and he just doesn't look like he wants to be there at all. It's probably written into his contract and they'll just put on a tracksuit and they have to do these things. I just think it's to make the clubs look better and to make the clubs look like they care. But if you look at what's happened recently in terms of is football coming back, are these clubs furloughing staff? I don't think that a lot of the clubs really do care about the community. I do think it is a media exercise.
It's great. Got another question, sort of slightly off what we were just talking about, but Eleanor Drywood would like to know about the use of cost effective as a measure for the program you were looking at. So given the ethos of CSR, which is to move beyond solely economic imperatives, have you looked at any other measures of success of the program?
Yeah, I'm using the social return on investment analysis model for my PhD, and it was something that I used for the dissertation last summer, but I wasn't able to collect enough evidence from one paper to give that an accurate assessment. And I do think it's important. The problem with cost benefit analysis is it doesn't attribute the social value attached to these programs. It doesn't look obvious. Whereas if you can truly analyze that, you can see what other impacts that has. So if I said to somebody, a program reduces crime, people wouldn't consider maybe people feeling safer within the community, or just other things like that can really help out the local community from a social perspective. So it is something that I'm going to try and obviously put football quite prevalently into my PhD with the social return analysis. And of course, if anyone's interested to know more about that, I'm more than happy for people to message me.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Josh. I've got a couple more questions for you, so you're not off the hook just yet. We've got a question from Matthew Philpott. How much do you think the Premier League sponsors shape the type of community interventions delivered by the Premier League, and how is this affecting potential outcomes from such programs?
I'll be honest with you, this is something that I'm not too aware of, so I wouldn't be able to give you a properly academic answer on this. What I do know is that the Premier League Charitable Fund are responsible for funding a lot of these community outreach programs. I think that was pushed quite a lot by government, and there was a lot of to and fro, but it was something that Scudamore was more than happy to come out and sort of celebrate and show off. But I think it was only after sort of a bit of a wink and a nudge. But that's something that I'd be interested to looking at sponsors, especially in the Premier League. Yeah.
Great. We've got a question from Joanna Nim about whether the Premier League funds overseas CSR projects, kind of in that vein.
Yeah, they do. So the Premier League Charitable Fund will give these clubs money, and then you've got to send them a report of what you've done and tick all these boxes, as it were, and then it comes around in a 3-year cycle. So if you automatically go up into the Premier League, then you automatically get the 100k. You move into that tier 1. But say if you're a club like Sunderland in League One, where there's a lot of deprivation that could do with a lot of community outreach programs, you can apply to be in that tier 2 and get that higher funding. So the Premier League Charitable Fund does look after that. Yeah.
That's brilliant. We've got time for one final question. We've got Michael Connolly is talking about his own historical researches on Brother Walfrid, who helped found Celtic for charitable purposes, and Celtic has its own foundation in terms of CSR, but much charitable activity endures through independent supporters groups. And is this something you found prevalent in the English context?
In terms of activism, like the fan supported food banks, yeah, I think that's something that's really started to shine through, especially in the last decade, as we all know, with the austerity measures that have been in place. But in terms of fans, in terms of programs like Kicks, where they'll coach kids and they'll give kids opportunities to go and play like for example, when I was doing my research, I was taken over to Sheffield with the Kicks program in Holton Moor on a minibus, and all the way back because they beat me in a football game. And we beat you, and it was brilliant. So but I don't think the fans are involved in that. I think that sort of comes from these community projects. But in terms of fan activism, like fans have been brilliant for stuff like food banks and raising money for other things. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And I think you can take a breather now, Josh. Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure you will get some follow-up questions. As Josh said, he welcomes feedback and any questions offline as well. So please do reach out. This is part of what we're trying to do here with the Football Collective. Do make connections. Do talk to people who have got similar interests to you. We can now take a few minutes break. If somebody wants a cup of coffee, now is the time to get it, and we will be starting up again in 4 minutes with the next presentation, who is Owen Reksheet. If you are around, just to get you started. So thank you very much, Josh. That was brilliant. Thank you. There you are. I see you, Aaron. Somebody needs to unmute you and get you set up.
So,
Yeah, sure.
I share my screen now, or when you tell them?
Well, just give it a couple minutes, just so if anybody needs a break, and then they will set off in a couple of minutes. But just get
Sure.
yourself ready. Make sure your presentation is up and set. Take a few deep breaths, and we'll set off in a minute or two. Okay.
Thank you.
Sartak, any comments from you while we're waiting?
Well, it was a brilliant presentation from Josh, and I liked the finishing screen where he put the links to the pizza production company he is Impresa Socially, I guess you were working for, which is I guess a social program where
Yeah. I didn't want to try and mention it, but yeah.
Yeah, you can mention it.
Yeah, it's in my Twitter bio. It's a social enterprise I'm currently working on. Again, if anyone's interested to know more about that, you can message me. I'm happy to have a meeting with you about that on the Zoom. Yeah. So thanks, Sartak. Thanks, everyone.
Once lockdown is over, you are delivering me a pizza.
Yeah. Well, we'll be going for a pint, definitely.
Yeah, cheers. I guess we can get audience set up now.
All right, brilliant. Aaron, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, hello everyone. So it is around 2:44 in India. So very good afternoon from here, and I hope everyone is safe and is in good health and doing good. So my topic for today is a study on the conflict between the two national football leagues in India. So it's a very unlikely scenario that a country has two national football leagues. One is the I-League and the one is the younger one is the Indian Super League or the ISL. So getting started. So the purpose for this research paper was to understand the reason behind the declining of the I-League. So the I-League formally started in around the early 2000s, and it didn't go well as expected. Though it was the National Football League, many clubs got bankrupted, and again the revenues were less, and the whole of the tournament ran in a huge loss. So in 2013, the AIFF, which is the All India Football Federation, along with the IMG-backed IMG Reliance, and along with Star Sports, which is a leading broadcasting company in India, they thought of initiating a new tournament, which would almost be like the Major League Soccer in the United States. So that's how the ISL came into the existence. And the third point for the purpose is to understand the feasibility of merging the two leagues to form an unified national league, because it is not feasible for a national body to run two parallel national leagues. So one has to be given the right priority, and that's the main topic of this research paper. So the hypothesis is conducted in mainly three parts. The one being the main reason for the failure of I-League. So as stated, the main reasons which led to the failure of I-League is mainly because of the finance structure of the I-League. The second one is they clash with the ISL teams, which is the Indian Super League teams in terms of fan base. And the third is lack of competitiveness and competitive balance, obviously, because some teams are actually very strong and some teams are actually very weak. So there's no competitive balance in the whole tournament. And again, although the ISL started in 2014 with a huge start, but then again from 2015, the ISL in terms of revenue as well as in terms of spectatorship fell a bit. So the reasons for that is mainly considered because of the lack of support from regions in India, and also because of the clash of interest with the I-League teams mainly in terms of fan base. So I'll give you a story. I'm from a city called Kolkata, which is in the eastern India, and Kolkata is mainly divided into two main football teams, and which are East Bengal FC and Mohun Bagan FC. So the thing is that before 2014, the whole of the city was divided into these two teams, and when ISL came, so the city had their own team called the ATK, which was backed by then Atletico Madrid. So from 2015 and 16, so there was a rumor that the I-League would be given the standard of a tier 2 league and the ISL will be the primary national league of India. So that's why all the fans who are from the East Bengal and Mohun Bagan teams who were supporting ATK, so they backed up and they, being loyal to their original fan base, so they stopped supporting the team as well as ISL. So considering the viability of the merging process, so obviously ISL and I-League has to be merged to form a unified league only if a bigger ISL club acquires the smaller I-League club. So when I wrote this research paper, it was around late November and early December. But earlier this year, a news came that the city team of Calcutta, which is ATK, which participates in ISL, they took over Mohun Bagan and they will be playing under their banner and also in the ISL. So the methodologies in this research paper included the questionnaire method, which included 43 responses also the India and who have a sound knowledge of football business and all these leagues. And the secondary sources, the data collected from the various websites and articles, and the statistical tools which use are the graphs and tables to draw the inferences. So the respondent profile, the age includes, as you can see, the maximum of the respondents were of a younger group from 16 to 25 years, which included around 88.4% of the population, and from 26 to 35 years, the percentage was around 2.3%, and 46 and above was 9.3%. 9.3%. And for the gender, it was around 17.1% male and around 20.9% female. So when I conducted this survey, I gave them the question. So one of the main questions to them was, what do they think the reason was behind the fall of I-League? So what they concluded was it was mainly because of the weak financial structure, which 44.7% of the people opted for, and around 19.1% opted for sponsorship issues. So as you can see, a weak financial structure will always lead you to lesser funding, and that's what sponsorship is all about. And the 49% of the population concluded that the clash with ISL teams in terms of fan base was the major reason, which I guess I have told you about the two teams in Calcutta. And 12.8% of them concluded that lack of competitive players, and 8.5% concluded that it was because of the poor infrastructure that football has in India. So the second question was, what do they think for the reasons behind the fall of ISL? So again, 34% of the population say that lack of support from the specific region of the country, which we can obviously conclude from the story I have told. From Calcutta, hardly any people support the ISL as well as ATK. Again, conflict with the I-League is a major reason, which I have already told you, and lack of competitive players, what I believe is a major problem, because most of the viewers of ISL is mainly of a younger generation, and till now ISL has been played by major great footballers like Diego Forlan and Roberto Carlos. So the thing is that they are great players, but again, the younger generation fails to relate with them. So they want younger blood, and that's why ISL has failed a bit in terms of their expectations. So when the respondents were asked about the feasibility of the merging with ISL and I-League, so what they concluded is that they wanted a uniform league in form of ISL. 70.2% of the people supported it, and around 29.8% were not in favor of this decision. And when the people were asked about if they have faith in ISL for considering it the tier 1 football league in India and considering it to be the primary national league of India, so 80.9% of the people said that yes, they wanted ISL to be the tier 1 football league for its glamour as well as entertainment measures and everything, and 19.1% again, they were not in favor of this decision. So the key findings from this survey is that the statistical analysis proves the hypothesis which I told in the beginning, and Indian Super League, that is the ISL, has been concluded to be the only way to develop the footballing culture in India. Fan conflict again has been a key barrier in the acceptance of ISL in certain regions of India, and again the weak financial structure has been an issue for I-League, which has been the key issue for its back value. Again, the few facts about ISL. ISL is one of the most modern leagues in India, which has been a sister tournament of the Indian Premier League, which is the the T20 form of cricket league in India. So ISL has no relegation of teams like the Major League Soccer, and main reason is to boost the competition and encourage all the teams to participate in it. So ISL is backed by the 3 sporting giant firms, the Star Sports, the Reliance backed by the IMG, and the India Football Federation, which is the AIFF. So ISL is sponsored by companies like the Apollo Tyres, Puma, Hero MotoCorp, and Premier League as its strategic partners. So participation of great players like Luis Figo, Diego Forlan, and Roberto Carlos and Robert Fial, etc., has increased the brand value of ISL and has attracted crowd in the very beginning. But again, since younger generation failed to relate them with these players who played football in early 2000 and 2008, so that has led to the fall of the ISL to a certain extent. So teams are a perfect blend of the ex-World Cup winners like the names mentioned before, the Division B foreign nationals who are mainly from Spain, and the young Indian talent like Sunil Chhetri, who is the captain of the ISL team of Bengaluru FC. So from the conclusion point, so although ISL ran in loss for 3 consecutive years from 2015 to 18, plans are being made to develop the league with a strong financial structure. The mergence of the 2 leagues is certainly a long and tough process, but it has already begun with the merging of Mohun Bagan Athletic Club with ATK. So ISL has made a promising path for the grassroots in India with setting up football schools with respective city franchises, and one of the teams, which is the Mumbai City FC, they along with IMG Reliance, every year they plan a youth football tournament with the unprivileged as well as the privileged kids of Mumbai, and they conduct this tournament so that everyone can participate in it to boost the footballing culture in India. So that's all from my end. Thank you, and I would be open to any questions from you people.
Thanks, Arvind. Thank you very much. We do have a couple of questions coming through. So starting with, don't you think that the large proportion of respondents belonging to a single age group, because the majority were in that kind of younger age group that you looked at, fails to provide a holistic overview of the reasons you have mentioned for the failure of the I-League and the ISL, leading to a bias?
Sorry, I couldn't get your question. Hello?
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I couldn't understand your question.
Oh, so basically, do you think there's an inherent bias from basically surveying a proportion of the population, the younger proportion of the population, and getting their views? Does that create a bias in your findings?
No, I don't think so, because the target group was obviously everyone from the younger age as to the older age. But again, the people I know and the respondents were obviously had a sound knowledge of football, which everyone doesn't have. So that was the main reason that around 88% of the population was from a younger age.
So it's kind of representative of the sample of people that watch the I-League.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, I've got a question from Sartak. Wouldn't a qualitative methodology help to identify key themes?
I don't think so, because when you are trying to measure the success ratio, or say the success of the two leagues, you can't really get into the qualitative methods, because then when you are measuring the success, then it is all about numbers, and the numbers are represented in either the spectatorship or in the revenue. So that's why I think quantitative methodology was feasible in this case.
That's great. I've got a question from Dan Parnell. Do you agree with stakeholder perspectives? As in, is there a problem with commercialization and globalization? And do we need to rethink how football should be run rather than, keep trying to replicate models?
Sorry, I couldn't get your question.
Sorry, is the connection pretty bad? Basically, do you think globalization and the commercial outlook in football, do you think there's a problem with that, and should we be trying to create new models rather than trying to replicate the old models, which is what would happen if you merged the two leagues? Oh, you still with us? You've frozen.
I'm doing right now, but everything right.
Sorry, I think there's a problem with the connection. I'm just trying to work out whether it's my connection or your connection. Can people just, Paddy and Josh, you're at the top of my screen. Can you just wave to me so I can just work out whether it's my connection or, thank you, sorry.
I think the connection's Arwin's end. Christina,
Okay.
sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Paddy. Sorry, Arwin. I think the connection is pretty bad. You've kind of frozen again. We can't really hear but we are out of time. But I do have some questions here for you. So what I'll do is I might just pull them through into a document and send them across to you. So just something to think about in terms of when you're trying to pull stuff together. I'm really sorry about the connection issues. But obviously this is one of the problems with having an online conference. But thank you very, very, very much for your time and your very interesting presentation. And I'll send the questions across to you in a document, if that's all right, Aaron. Yeah, he's still frozen. So
My paper. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Thank you very much. So we'll take another 5-minute break here while I copy these questions across. And thank you very much again to Aaron, and we will then come back in 5 minutes with Michael Cole. So Michael, if you can start getting yourself ready, that would be brilliant. Thank you very much. Michael's ahead of the game. Look at that. Can we just wait a couple of moments? Michael, thank you.
Yeah, fine.
We'll just wait a couple of minutes just to make sure everybody who wants to be listening in is listening in, because I'm aware that people kind of sort of come in and out as a result of obviously this being an online all-day thing. But yeah, if we just wait a couple minutes, and then I will give you the go-ahead, and then you can get started in a couple of minutes.
Great, thanks, Christina.
Cheers, thank you. Kind of feel like we should have some elevator music or something for the breaks. Maybe start at.
I was hoping you were going to sing, Christina.
No, you definitely don't want that. Trust me.
You should have the music from Tony Hart, if anybody's my age. We
need an organ player. The local cinema to mine has an interval, and as an organ player, you get ice creams from about 1997.
I guess we should play some World Cup songs.
Gone out of date before I was born.
Oh. Just be careful with the copyright there.
Nobody's making any money.
Yeah. We are free. We promote free content.
And educational purposes. It's educational, therefore cannot be done for copyright. I teach media law. I will go to any court in the land.
Okay, I guess like we can start now. It's almost 10:40.
Okay. All right, Michael. Thank you very, very much. Please take it away.
Okay, hi everyone, welcome. My name is Michael Cole. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Tartu in Estonia. I'd like to talk today about a book chapter that I've recently been working on, which analyzes Ramzan Kadyrov's use of football as a political tool during the 2018 FIFA World Cup, and tries to put this in the context of how political leaders use football in general. So, as I mentioned, I'm a PhD candidate in political science. So I'm going to start back with a bit of the politics theory about what populism is. Then I'm going to mention which leaders I decided to include in my study. How do they use football in different ways? Who exactly is Kadyrov? How does he use football in general? And then what happened at the World Cup in Russia? And finally answer the question, do I think he actually used populist tactics? So populism is a word that we hear a lot all over the place, but actually in academic circles, the term is extremely highly contested. So for the purposes of this study, I really understand populism as a way of doing politics or a political style. And it involves leaders or politicians framing the world as divided into two opposing camps. So on the one side, you have the people who are good and pure, and against them you have the elite or the enemies. So as I said, the people are pure, they belong to a national heartland, and they have a shared identity based on this national heartland. But the elite or the enemies are corrupt, they're exploitative, and everything they do is to try to undermine the will of the people. So if a leader is to be successful using this political style, They need to in some way connect themselves to the idea of the nation and this shared identity, and also to demonstrate that they are somehow close to or one of the people. So obviously there are lots of political leaders and a lot of them use football, so I didn't include all of them. But in my study, I looked at those that were leaders of political parties, but not necessarily in power. So it wasn't necessarily presidents or prime ministers. They're all ideologically right-wing, although on this scale, some are further to the right than others. And they all appear to use football in different ways, strategically for their own political gain. So I managed to obviously they use football in lots of different ways, but I managed to generalize by putting them into three broad categories of how they use the game. So the first one is celebrity endorsement. And a couple of examples here in Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, during his presidential campaign, got a lot of endorsement from well-known Brazilian footballers. Here he is with Ronaldinho. And in Turkey, Erdogan famously posed with Mesut Ozil and İlkay Gündoğan a couple of years ago, and then turned up at Ozil's wedding. So he used these players to court the Turks within Germany in order to get their votes in an election. There's also demonstrating the common touch. So during the World Cup, you probably remember the Croatian president, Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović, was often seen wearing the national shirt. She attended lots of games, and it was highly publicized that she paid for her own tickets. She often sat with the ordinary supporters, and she tried to tie herself to the Croatian people. And she was fortunate because Croatia did really well in the World Cup, but in Finland, until recently at least, they've not had a great national team. So this guy here is Timo Soini. He was the leader of the True Finns party, which was a populist right-wing party, and he actually adopted Millwall as his favorite team. Now, it's no coincidence because Millwall wear blue and white, and they're the same colors as the Finnish flag. And he often used to wear this scarf at political meetings. He also underlined his connections to Millwall because he's a political outsider, and the song that Millwall are famous for, "No One Likes Us, We Don't Care," seems to fit really well with his political stance. And the third one, which I think is even more interesting perhaps, is the use of football to demonstrate what leaders consist of the nation and how to construct the idea of what the nation is. And there are two opposite ways that this seems to have happened. So in Hungary, Viktor Orban has used football to demonstrate a view of Hungary in terms of a wider, greater Hungary. So he's expanded the idea of what people understand as Hungary. And he's done this by sponsoring training camps for footballers in Slovakia, Romania, Croatia, Serbia, and Ukraine, amongst those Hungarian diaspora communities, to bring them into the idea of what Hungary is. In contrast, Jean-Marie Le Pen used football to demonstrate an exclusionary form of what the nation is. So he was famous during 1998 in the World Cup in France for saying that when French fans look at the team, they don't recognize themselves. And he's very critical of the players in the French side of African and Middle Eastern origin, and how the problems they had integrating and working together as a team reflect problems in the society as well. Okay, so who is Ramzan Kadyrov? Well, Ramzan Kadyrov is the leader of Chechnya, which is a semi-autonomous republic in the south of Russia, as you can see in the picture there. And he first came to prominence in Russia back in 2004. His father, Akhmat Kadyrov, had been placed in charge of Chechnya. He was Putin's man in the region to basically bring stability there. And he was killed in a terrorist attack at a football stadium in Chechnya. Ramzan Kadyrov was flown to Moscow. Here he is meeting with Putin. And since then, they've formed a very close personal bond. In the West, he's known as this kind of dualistic character. On the one hand, he's a very famous authoritarian leader. He's accused of numerous human rights abuses, but he also is very well known for his social media account in which he presents all these kind of quirky pictures. And he recently was involved in a bit of a disagreement with John Oliver about something to do with Kadyrov's cat. And how does he use football? Well, in several ways, actually. One of the interesting things here is the team Terek Grozny. So Grozny being the capital of Chechnya. Now Terek is well established. Kadyrov was involved in the running of Terek Grozny. And a couple of years ago, he actually decided to change the name from Terek Grozny to Akhmat Grozny. So he gave the club the name of his own father and said that this would make the players play even better. He also named the stadium after his father, the Akhmat Arena in Grozny. He has his own football camps there, the Ramzan Academy, and
Sorry,
he
Michael.
hosts. Yep.
Sorry to jump in. We're all still seeing your title slide.
Oh,
I did send you a message, but I'm not sure you're picking it up.
Okay.
And so yeah,
Sorry.
thank you. Sorry.
Oh no, okay. Okay, I'll share all this later anyway, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, okay, cool. Thank you, Christina. Okay, I'll start this one again, right? So Akhmat Kadyrov, he uses football in several ways. So he named the side Akhmat Grozny after his father. He also named the arena in Grozny the Akhmat Arena. And he has a training camp named after himself, the Ramzan Football Academy there, as well as hosting several matches for famous footballers. Here he is with Maradona. And he's also invited people like Franco Baresi and Luis Figo, which kind of lent some authenticity and legitimacy to his regime. So what happened at the World Cup? Well, of course, the World Cup in 2018 was held in Russia, and Chechnya and Kadyrov hosted the Egyptian national team. Even though there were no games played in Grozny or Chechnya, the team still stayed there. And he also gave a very rare interview to the BBC Russian service in which he explained his motivation for hosting the Egyptian side and also used the opportunity to promote some of the ideas about the region. So can we say that he used populist tactics during this World Cup? Well, celebrity endorsement. Of course, very famously, he posed for a number of pictures with Mohamed Salah, who, you know, is a famous footballer, and he's no ordinary famous footballer. He's one of the most famous in the world, not only in the Middle East, but pretty much everywhere. I even have Mohamed Salah on my cup here today, just to show how famous he is everywhere. So this was a real way that Kadyrov tried to legitimize his regime. But that seems quite obvious, but I think there was more at work than this. He also used the occasion to demonstrate the common touch. So he said that Mohamed Salah is a Muslim brother and he wanted to pray with him, which is something that ordinary Muslim men might do. He also, quite humbly for him, mentioned that he loves playing football to the BBC, but he's not really very good at it. So this contrasts sharply with people like Putin or Erdogan, who tend to use sport to demonstrate how amazing they are and how macho they are. But probably the most interesting is this idea of how he used the World Cup to construct an idea of what Chechnya is, to construct the nation as both part of Russia, but an important bridge between Russia and the Middle East. So he used this populist frame that I referred to early on when he said that in Chechnya, we're ready to accept guests and destroy our enemies. That's the kind of republic we are. Now, it might be normal for a leader to say we're ready to accept our guests to the country, but to say that we'll destroy our enemies would be quite surprising coming from some others. He also mentioned that the Chechen people were happy that the World Cup is here, even though there were actually no games being played there. And again, this cements the idea that Chechnya is a part of Russia. And he said he wanted Russia to win the World Cup, which does the same thing. But within that, he also took the opportunity to mention how important Chechnya is. The Akhmat Arena is the best and most visited stadium in Russia. So this is not just an ordinary part of Russia, it's got something going for it. He gave Mohamed Salah honorary Chechen citizenship, which is quite strange because Chechnya is not a country. There's not really such a thing as Chechen citizenship. And he used the opportunity to bridge between Russia and the Middle East. Salah's popularity in that region helps to legitimize Kadyrov there and also show that Chechnya is not only a part of Russia with important connections to Putin, but it's also an important link to the Middle East. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take your questions now, and if you want to ask more questions, you can find me on Twitter. You can find my blog here, where I've written a blog post which goes into these themes in a bit more detail. And also I've written some other things about football and identity in Poland. And I will, as I mentioned to Christina, I'll share these slides because I realized they weren't all visible. But thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. Really, really appreciated. We do have questions coming in. You'll be happy to know. So we can start with one from Leslie Krang saying he's gone beyond football and utilized UFC as well. And he's interested in the masculinity thing in Kadyrov is also important for populism. And have you looked at this, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few studies about the sports that Kadyrov uses, particularly on his Instagram. I've not personally looked so much at the UFC because I think I was more interested in football. But yeah, you're right. He's definitely projecting this idea of masculinity, kind of in his own image. And he really uses this to show what he thinks a Chechen man should be. He's got a very, he's very anti-LGBT, for example, and this comes into that as well. But yeah, you're right. It's a very interesting area. I haven't personally explored it too much though.
That's great. It's lots of fascinating areas there. We've got another question from Benjamin Pollock asking about contested concepts of the Ummah, Islamic community, and nation within Russian football. Do they often intertwine within a sporting discourse?
That's a good question. It's way beyond the scope of what I know. I mean, I'd love to discuss it more. I'm sure they probably do. I think, I mean, again, Kadyrov uses this kind of idea of being, you know, Muslim a lot to position himself as something slightly outside Russia. And I'm sure there's a lot more to look into with that. But personally, I haven't. I'd love to talk about that further, but I don't really know what I could add there.
That's fine. There's also a question about the autonomy of sport. Obviously, when people talk a lot about the mix between politics and sport, this idea of autonomy of sport comes up. What are your thoughts on that?
You mean, I mean, as in the separation between sport and politics?
Yes.
I mean, I think
theoretical.
I mean, it's very difficult to separate the two, isn't it? I think it depends. In different countries, there's obviously different trends. I think in a lot of the former Soviet Union countries, I think there's a lot closer connections than it appears there might be in the UK, and in different ways. One of the things with Kadyrov using Akhmat Grozny is this kind of idea that it's his personal team and it's almost the national team of that region. In the same way that during Soviet times, a team like Ararat Yerevan was basically a proxy for the national team of Armenia, or Dinamo Kiev was Ukraine, or Dinamo Tbilisi was Georgia. So, I mean, yeah, they're definitely, I don't think you can completely separate politics and sport at all.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting subject. One can talk on that for hours. We've got another question from Gavin Price, who's interested in small nations and regions looking to use football to validate their status or nationhood. Do you think Chechnya will continue to use football as a platform to seek status as a sovereign nation? And will they use the Kanifa World Cup as a stepping stone to achieve this?
This is very interesting. I think in the case of Chechnya, no. I think for Chechnya, it suits them to be part of Russia. It suits Kadyrov to be a close ally of Putin, and any ideas of secessionism would not go down very well there. I mean, I think they've kind of I mean, they send Akhmat Grozny out to play friendly matches in Ukraine and Turkey and some of these other places, but I definitely think that becoming a member of Konifa, for example, would be a big step too far for Kadyrov, and I don't think he'd want to do that.
Interesting stuff. I've got another question from Danny Fitzpatrick about why left-wing populism utilizes football less often. Is it an inherent tension between socialism and sport?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's a point I didn't mention, actually, that I didn't actually look at any left-wing populists. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't looked at that so much. I mean, I think the idea of left-wing populism and sport, there's definitely connections there. I think in places like Venezuela, things like that might be going on, but I'm not actually sure. I'd be interested to look into that further.
That's brilliant. Thank you. There's also a comment on there for you, but I'm sure we can turn it into a question somehow. Somebody's talked about Timo Soini, a famous Finnish politician and Millwall fan, who is in the recent 5 years was Minister for Foreign Affairs for 4 years and Deputy Prime Minister for 2. So not such an outsider anymore. I'm guessing that kind of links into what you were talking previously, but do you think there's, kind of similar stuff linking to what you were talking about?
I mean, this is the thing, like a lot of these guys are not outsiders either because they're leaders, and it's just the image that they portray. Soini definitely uses this image. I think there was even an article I saw where he claimed he was going to negotiate with somewhat David Davis, I think, about Brexit at a Millwall game. So yeah, he's not completely an outsider, but it's an image he likes to portray, and by tying himself to Millwall, he seems to be able to do that really well. But yeah, it's an image, and that's the thing. Like it's constructed, and whether it's consistent, probably not.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Michael. That was really, really interesting. And from the comments, I'm sure you can see some of them because some of them are addressed to everyone. It seems to have been a very well received presentation, as have all so far. So that is good news for us. We have another 5-minute break where Paddy is going to play us some music. I'm waiting to see what instrument comes out next, and then you guys can all get a coffee, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes with George Parisis. So if George can start getting himself ready. Thanks again, Michael. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, just an important update. Helena is not feeling well, so she will be unable to chair the 1 p.m. to 2:40 p.m. session. So Robbie Miller will be chairing that session instead of Helena.
Thanks, Artak. Where's the elevator music, Paddy? Come on.
Right, I'm going to make a brew. Who wants one?
You any biscuits?
I've got biscuits. I've got popcorn too for you, Paddy.
You know what I bought? I bought those ginger biscuits. You know the Lotus biscuits you get in posh coffee shops. You know that they get them in Europe and France a lot. And I've just realised they're just a ginger nut with notions. It's just ginger nut with pretension. It's a wee ginger nut in a wee plastic wrapper. What's going on there, Dan? Lad? Do you get those in the Woodchurch Estate? Do you?
It serves you right for going to coffee shops, doesn't it?
You're keeping it real, aren't you?
Going to coffee shops for the biscuits.
Are they tea bags, Dan?
Pardon?
The Yorkshire tea, otherwise I don't want it.
No, when Yorkshire Tea associated with a well-known political party recently?
No, they come out and said they were. No, I have to defend Yorkshire tea there.
PG tips today.
No, can't have it.
Right, I'm going to make myself a coffee.
Right, I'm going to play the theme music from the football collective podcast if I can find it.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Actually, I'll just play some reggae, will it? Feels reggae-y, doesn't it? It's a bit reggae.
Right. I think thanks for that, Paddy. I think we're almost there, so we can mute you, and George can take it away. Thank you, George. Please do start.
Thank you, Dr. Filippo. Good morning, everyone. Good morning from Athens. And let me start by thanking the Football Collective by giving me the opportunity to present here, and thank its organizing committee too. Now, let's start right away with analyzing the title of this presentation that's called Football and the Working Classes in 19th Century England. I hope you're listening to me well. I hope you're seeing the slide. And we start by saying that football is the sport, the modern sport that we all know, love, and study. The working classes consist of every single member of the working class that was formed as a ramification of the Industrial Revolution. And you may ask, why 19th century England? Well, because there and then, in 1863 to be more exact, the first football association in the world was established. We have answered rapidly the first 4 questions: what, who, where, and when. And the goal of this presentation will be to answer the remaining 2: how and why the workers came to be so interested in football. As I'm talking, you'll be seeing some footage of football from the start of the 20th century. It's the earliest footage we have from football in England, and as a result, some of the earliest footage that we have from football globally. So let's state the 3 prerequisites that were needed for workers to be interested in football. At first, they needed to know what the sport was. And this was made possible because street football has been surviving in cities and countryside alike, and also modern sport has been flourishing in public schools. Secondly, they needed time to play and watch it, and time was given to them by Factory Act of 1850. This freed the morning of Saturdays, the afternoons of Saturdays, I'm sorry, and gave the workers a day and a half of consecutive rest. The weekends would be labeled as football days since they offered the necessary free time for football activities. Lastly, they needed money. And money was accumulated because during and after the Industrial Revolution, wages went up while the cost of living went down. How did the workers came to be so much interested in football? Well, they did that firstly as players. As you may have seen in the English game of Netflix, despite some historical inaccuracies, the most characteristic example is that of Blackburn Olympic in 1983, which won the FA Cup against Old Etonians. Up until the end of the 19th century, no other team than working class teams would go on to win the FA Cup. Now, the second part of support of workers in the football network was that of fans. They cheered on the stadiums, they went to the football fields to support the team, and as you may see now on the video, there was a group of mostly male, mainly between 16 and 39 years old, and you may notice that women are not there. I'll come back to that. So, what we see also is a stadium, and this is a period of time that has iconic stadiums be built, like White Hart Lane for Tottenham in London, Stamford Bridge in London also for Chelsea, and Anfield in Liverpool for Everton. This has been a move by owners to maximize their profits, since gate receipts were very important. So another move in this direction was, excuse me, was to transform the teams from playing to limited liability companies. And these companies were supported by the workers. They rushed to give money to them because they had formed a strong emotional bond with them already, even it was just a few years. So, as you may understand, money was all around, and yet it was in the epicenter. It was in the epicenter of the newly founded football network that consisted of newspapers, pubs, betting, and all these things that make the scene sound a little too familiar nowadays. The national domination of football would be graced by the Royal English family in 1914, as the King, George V, watched himself the FA Cup final and delivered personally the trophy to the winning team's captain. Now, the King is here, so you may understand that the situation is getting serious. And in fact, the first reason that pushed workers towards football was a socio-political one. We have entered the era of socialism, communism, labor movement, and syndicalism. And these big words are frightening to the upper classes. They are frightening to aristocrats and middle classers alike. So they present football to society, aka the workers, as a lesson of hierarchy, of morals, and fair play. They want to socially control the workers through it. Yet, they couldn't control the spontaneous wave that rose because of them, because the workers found in football a way of achieving better social status and, naturally, increasing their incomes. We do know that footballers were getting better paid than the average industrial workers. Now that we have seen the bigger picture, we may move our focus to the average working man of this era. During the 19th century, living and working conditions of the working class had its ups and downs, but their common denominator was that they weren't that good. Workers were miserable, were poor, and were pessimists about the future. So that's why the average worker turned into football, because it may be a sport, but it always remains a game. And as a game, even in its commercialized form, it serves and fulfills a primitive and absolutely human need, and that is to have fun. Not only does this need get fulfilled individually, but also in groups. When a worker shares his passion about football with men who share this common interest with him, he enters a leisure community. And this may happen even in rivalries, even when arguing about a fan of a rival team, and we do know that English has many derbies like that. Wednesday versus Sheffield versus United in Sheffield, City versus United in Manchester, and all that stuff. He's amplifying his sense of belonging in a community. So this is very important because football offers psychological relief. The last dimension that I must mention is that of gender. The thing is that men chose football because they were men, and this may sound like a vague phrase, but it does have an explanation. Firstly, sports were stereotypically and traditionally male because they were violent, and therefore deemed unsuitable for women. Secondly, nationalism came to be the prevalent ideology in this period of time in England. Jingoism, as it was called for healthy and fit soldiers to bolster the ranks of English troops. As a result, football was seen not only as entertainment, but also as a form of training for England's future soldiers. Last but not least, I must say something about women too, as I have promised already. Women wanted to play football, and they did. We have entered the era of suffragettes, feminism, and another batch of scary words for men. So men were scared of that, and they sought isolation from football. They wanted to preserve their masculinity. They wanted to escape their houses, escape the pressure that was coming from them. So while they did want to isolate themselves, they did not manage to do that, as we do know that in 1995, the first all-female game happened in London between London ladies, among London ladies. So, as the video is coming to an end, as the presentation is coming to an end, I would like to summarize by saying that this whole project has been under the wings of social history. It has been an attempt to combine different aspects of history, like the working classes, gender, society, politics, and this has been my selected bibliography because this has been my master's thesis. And I would like to end this presentation by stating that the final point that I would like to be made, the take-home message, if you like, would be what David Goldblatt has written in his book, The Ball is Round, The Global History of Football, that no history of the modern world can be written without an account of football. Thank you very much for your attention. Feel free to ask me anything. I hope I know how to answer.
Thanks, George. Thank you for your presentation. We do have a few questions coming in, and the first one was one which lots of people will recognize. It's a common pub debate. It's from Matthew Taylor, who's asking about the English Game mini-series. What is your view of the series as a form of history, and do you think its factual inaccuracies matter?
Well, I must thank Professor Taylor for his question. I think what I'm going to reply applies to mostly everything that tries to reconstruct history. The English game has its factual faults. That's true. But it serves as a starting point. It serves as something that will ignite the spark to someone to get more interested about football. sure, there was no Blackburn. There were two Blackburns, Olympic and Rovers. And I don't know how much importance the average viewer would give to that. I did, because I knew the story, I had studied the story, and I was emotionally upset when they made a mistake like that. But what if my mother would see it? Would she have a problem with that? I don't know. So I think it depends on the viewer. I was fine with the English game. I enjoyed it, despite acknowledging that it had some mistakes. So I think the truth for everyone is in the middle, kind of.
Yeah, that's like I said, this is a common theme, and I'm sure you could debate it for hours about historical inaccuracies in series and films. There is one coming through on Facebook Live, but I'm a little bit behind, so I will come back to that question, which is linked to this. And I'm just going to ask a very short yes or no question, which is that Fatty Forks in the video? Question from Leslie Krang.
Well, I couldn't really track down the players showed in the videos. The matches are very easily trackable. We do know the dates, we do know the rival teams, so that's very much easy. But about the rosters, I haven't managed to find the clues just yet.
Okay. Can we map the impact of the 1850 Act on the emergence of professional clubs, i.e. what industries were not covered by it, and how did this restrict the development of football clubs in certain areas?
Well, we do know that after the Factory Act of 1850, 7 years after that, just 7 years later than that, the first football club in the world is formed, and this is Sheffield FC. It didn't cover all the industries at first altogether. At first, it was about factories, employing mostly weavers, spinners, and it wasn't geographically altogether. So at first it was working, it was a law that was passed for the north of England. And in the areas that the Factory Act wasn't applied, the workers were upset and they wanted this to be a national law. And as the time went by, it really happened to be that. So it would be beneficial for the national uprising of football.
That's great. We've got loads of questions coming in. I'll try and get through as many as possible. Great videos, by the way, from Robin Ireland. Would you say football has always been capitalist from the beginning, or from 1863 at least? Bread and circuses for the workers, even allowing for the fun.
Well, yes, I must how to say it? Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, bread and circuses is an expression that has been going on since the Roman ages. So why would it change in 1863? But as I stated on the presentation, they couldn't control how the workers dealt with that. The workers naturally did not know that this was being presented to them and projected to them as a tool. What they saw was their game, their fun, and their entertainment. So I'm not sure if the workers did understood that there has been another attempt, in fact, to control them. But this is a very good question, because sociologists and some socialists from this age have been criticizing football as a means of distraction from the workers. And we can also add that we do know the very famous phrase that religion is the opium of the masses, that was said by Karl Marx and paraphrased by Arrigo Sacchi, the manager of Milan in Italy, that said that football has become the opium of the masses. So that's it.
Yeah, well, actually, that ties in with two questions I've got here. One from Ryan White, who's asking about how football has moved from sociological outlet in the 19th century to a political one in the 21st. And Josh Dean asking, do you think football was an emergence of what we might now understand as a form of tribal/cultural identity? So I know that's two questions in one, but they both kind of follow on from exactly what you were saying. So I thought you'd expand a little bit more.
So I'll try to answer both of them at the same time. I think football has already progressed since 1901. This has been the date that King Edward VII became the patron of the FA. And this was a move that showed that the upper classes, the king of all people, was supporting this. He might be supporting it for his own reasons, political reasons, of course, but it has been a political issue since then. Even before then, the first notion for the king to become an FA patron was denied in 1982. So the FA knew that if it had a patronage and from the king, it would be something crucial. And it was mutually beneficial. And sorry, if I may get reminded of the tribal cultural thing. I know. Yeah. Football was a cultural phenomenon, and it helped in solidifying a common identity. It could be cultural, it could be political. It helped the working classes identify themselves. And this is another interesting question. And I think we could be talking about it for many, many hours. Yes. But it did happen, yes.
Okay, final question from Richard Purves about whether your research has looked into the role of the pub in the founding of teams and its role in football in general. Again, a distinctively male environment many years ago.
Yeah, I think that the restriction of the presentation in 10 minutes cuts down to some juicy parts, but we all had to. About the pubs, we do know that many teams used pubs as locker rooms because they did not have enough money to buy their own buildings. And we do know that Everton used a pub as a locker room, and West Bromwich Albion did that. And pub owners and customers, of course, were also sponsoring teams. We do know that Wolverhampton Wanderers and Bolton Wanderers at a later stage of their existence did accept significant sums of money from pubs. As far as the comment about male environment is concerned, again. And I must say that on the gender dimension too, men wanted to escape their houses and go to the pubs because, as we know by the sources and bibliography, married women seldom entertained themselves outside of the house. So the pub was another core of male activity, solely male activity. That was the point.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. There's actually quite a few more questions, but we don't have time for them, I'm afraid. So thanks to everybody who's asked questions. George, if you can just have a look, because a lot of the thanks, and there are some questions and some people asking if they can get in contact with you, which are sent to everyone. So you should be able to view the chat. So just have a quick flick through the chat. Now, Panos is our next person, and I think he's finally been let on to Zoom because we had some issues getting him on. But I think he is now here. Is that right? Panos, are you here? We'll be kicking off in about a minute, if okay. So just kind of get yourself settled and ready, and then we will start in a minute or so because we slightly overran with the previous session. Is that all right, Panos? Are you okay?
Yes, I'm fine.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right, Panos, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Okay.
Okay, brilliant. So you can go.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Greetings from Greece again. My name is Panos Papageorgiou, and I'm a recent graduate from the University of Stirling in Scotland, awarded with a Master in Sports Management. First of all, I would like to thank Football Collective and the organizers of this conference for giving us the chance of networking and presenting our work. Today's presentation is my dissertation thesis supervised by Mr. Stefan Moro, and is about the feasibility of fan ownership model in the Greek professional football clubs. Football is the most popular sport in Greece, as in Europe in general. This popularity, combined with the increased commercialization of sport, drove football to increase revenues, mostly from sponsorship and broadcasting rights over the past decades. As a result, we have a financial, sporting, and administrative improvement of football clubs, but also an increased concern about the negative effects on the social and cultural role of football, as well as the balance between the financial and sporting performance of football clubs. Over the last decade, socio-political and economical turbulences led to changes in the ownership and governing structure of football clubs, and to sporadic but also increasing participation of fans in trusts getting part or full ownership of the clubs they support. The present study applies stakeholder theory, as it has a high relevance for research on football clubs. Friedman was the first one to develop the stakeholder concept in 1984. According to whom a stakeholder is in an organization is any group or individual who can affect or is affected by the achievement of an organization objectives. This study approach follows the model of Mitchell, Bradley, Angle, Good, developed in 1997 to identify the stakeholders that really count, classifying them into types based on their possession of 3 attributes in terms of their relationship with the organization: power, legitimacy, and urgency. The 3 types divide into classes based on the combination of the individual attribute each stakeholder possesses. Anagnostopoulos identifies the major stakeholders in Greek professional football as being employees, supporter clubs, sport parent clubs, local authorities, press, and organizing bodies. Although only employees, and especially footballers and supporter clubs, are considered to hold all the 3 attributes, and as a result are the 2 definitive stakeholders of Greek professional football clubs. Focusing on the definitive stakeholders of Greek professional football clubs, 3 professional footballers, 4 supporter clubs representatives from Greek Super League 1 clubs, and 1 supporter directs Europe consultant took part in the research. Qualitative research was identified as the most appropriate approach to provide a deeper understanding of the research question and the social phenomena surrounding it. Semi-structured interviews were considered as the most suitable technique of data collection, and the duration of these personal interviews was between 30 and 60 minutes, which took place in May and June 2019. Transcribed data were analyzed using NVivo software with the help of thematic analysis to identify, analyze, and report patterns within the data. Thematic analysis was organized around 3 core themes: Greek professional football, football fandom, and fan ownership. The following sub-themes of the core ones emerged. First of all, football clubs, where the social role of clubs highlighted and their importance as a means of exercise and entertainment. Football clubs owners, where there was intense mistrust regarding the motives of the owners and the way they manage the clubs. About satisfaction, there was increased concern about the way football and clubs are managed, about the violence incidents, the poor facilities, and the product offered in general to the Greek fans. The relationship between fans of different football clubs are mostly bad, and it is really immature at the present time to organize themselves and act collectively to negotiate with political and football authorities. Supporters in Greece has a voice in general regarding the management of their clubs, although only for the less important things, and this influence is not legally protected. In fan ownership initiatives through Europe, local authorities have a major role. On the other hand, local authorities in Greece just are here to help clubs by renting them municipal stadiums. About fan ownership and the averse of the past, there were 2 tries of fan ownership in Greece over the last decade. Both failed, and financial and sporting problems arose. In Aris Football Club, the problem seemed to be the institutional framework in which football and sport in general used to operate in Greece, which could not help initiatives like this to succeed. In Panathinaikos Football Club, the problem was clearer. It was not a bottom-up try, but it started from above, in difference with every other ownership initiative in Europe. According to the participants, the benefits of a fan ownership in a Greek football club could be the democratization and communalization of the football club and football in general, as well as the decrease of violent incidents in the football fields. To conclude with, despite the positivity over the fan ownership model, the feasibility of a successful implementation of it met with skepticism. The main obstacles seem to be the fans and society in general mentality and lack of collectiveness, as well as the reluctance of political and football authorities to aid such endeavors. Some suggestions by the participants were the separation between ownership and governance of football clubs, the revision of the institutional frameworks, as well as the cooperation and the communication between fans of different clubs to make such initiatives to succeed. This is my reference. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Panos. Very, very interesting presentation and very much appreciated. We do have a couple of questions coming through. One is about there having been regular investment of criminal organizations in football, as seen in many countries. And what is your view on these investments?
You mean about this or football in general?
Yeah, sure. Well, why don't you start with Greece? We all know there's plenty of problems there at the moment.
Yes, there are problems, but I'm not the person to answer such questions. Nobody can answer such questions at all. So.
Okay. I won't jump in and start talking about that. You did talk about supporters' voice not being legally protected in Greece. What other countries have models where they are that you might think that Greece should look to?
Actually, the best examples about fan ownership, for me personally, it's in England and Germany, different types of fan ownership, but there are some successful models there. Fans have chairs in the boardrooms, they have a voice, they can express the voice of the other fans. Although in Greece, fans don't have chairs in the boardrooms, so their voice is expressed just in the football fields and in marches outside of them. So a good start could be 1 or 2 chairs in the boardrooms of the football clubs.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you. I've got a question here. Fabian Fritz talks about Cyprus, where the fans of Omonia set up the fan team, the fan-owned team, People's Athletic Club, Omonia, in 1948, which went quite well. And since Greece is similar to Cyprus, could you learn from them?
Actually, Omonia is a great example. There were some dissatisfied fans with the boardroom of their club, so they moved to another club. They established a new club. Actually, we are in an era that we can have a lot of examples about fan ownership. We can have help from Supporters Direct Europe, for example, and other clubs that are keen to help in order to succeed. So Omonia is a great example. They have the help of Supporters Direct Europe, as far as I know. They work with other teams, for example, Cork City, I think. There are examples to follow. So because Cyprus and Greece are actually similar economies, similar societies, Omonia's example is a great example to follow. Yes.
Oh, brilliant. You also talked about one of the kind of suggestions that came out of your research was separation between ownership and governance that your respondents talked about. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. Although in Europe there are, in the most clubs, ownership and governance of football clubs are separated. For example, in Germany, owners are other than the governors and administrators of football clubs. In Greece, in most of the teams, the owner is the administration of the club too. So if it is my opinion too, not only the participants' opinion, that if you separate the ownership and the governance of a club, the administration of the club, there is more transparency, there is better allocation of duties. A club is administrated better than having all the authorities together.
Yeah, no, great. Great point. I've got a kind of question, which actually I was thinking along similar lines. So thank you, Stefan Lawrence, for your question. What are the risks and opportunities around ultras culture and the practicalities of fan ownership in Greece?
What culture, sorry?
The ultras culture.
I can get you.
Sorry, can you hear me? Around the ultras culture, you know, like Thera 7, Thera 21, and Thera 13.
Okay. So, look, I don't think that a fan doesn't want its club to be successful. Okay. If a businessman or a consortium of businessmen can't make your club successful, I think you have to get your club's destiny in your own hands and make it succeed, like the example of Omonia. So I don't think that, for example, Thera 21 could have any problem to get their club in their own hands and make it successful. It happened before with Aris, for example.
Yeah. So do you think there are any clubs that are ripe for fan ownership in Greece at the moment?
I think that when a club has financial difficulties, it is more keen on going to fan ownership, as we can see from examples in Europe and UK. So right now, most of the clubs in Greece could be perfect for a fan ownership model, I think.
That's brilliant. Right, I think that's we're out of time, and that's done on questions. But thank you very, very much, Banos. That was really interesting. If anybody wants to connect with Banos, his details are still there. This is obviously a hot topic at the moment. And we do have 5 minutes, well, 4 minutes actually, break before the last presentation in this session. Thanks so much, Banos.
Thank you.
Enjoy the sunshine.
Well, I will play a 2-minute song, and I asked Paddy literally that, can I play a song? Well, this song has like basically relevance to some of the Indian history and the colonial history, and it was sung by one of the teams, Mohun Bagan in India, when they won the IFA Shield, which is they were the first Indian team to defeat the British team. So it is melodious. People might not understand it, but still bringing a bit of cultural and international context. Well, that was the song, and I guess we can move to the next presentation now.
Thanks, Sartak. It's always good to have a little bit of culture in these events. We've got our next presenter is, yes, not sure we all want to see dancing today, but the next presenter is Michelle Batarfi. There you are, brilliant. So please feel free when you're ready to kick off. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Just let me. Okay. So hello, everyone. This is Michelle Batarfi. I'm a PhD student in economics at University of Reading. I'm going to present my first chapter of my thesis today. It's a joint work with my supervisor, James, and he's the one who encouraged me to submit my paper. I would like to thank you all for allowing me, and thank you for joining this conference. So the title of my chapter is Why Are we So Good at Football and They So Bad at It? An institution and in national footballing performance. Football is, just to give you a brief introduction about my research is football is the most popular global sport. Currently, there are more than 200 countries affiliated with FIFA across 6 football confederation. Of course, the performance are varied between countries. Some countries perform better than others. It's something sometimes related to economic factors, or sometimes it's related to sportness. And why performance is matter is sometimes is related to bargaining right, or sometimes is related to efficient use of resources. And it's sometimes matter because it's related to the football structure, or sometimes football is impacted by politics, like what's happened in 1969 for the football war between El Salvador.
Sorry, Michelle, can I just interrupt a second? Is it possible
Yes.
to share your slides with us so we can
Is
kind of
it
follow
not
along?
you can see it?
You need to share
sorry.
your slide.
Okay,
Thank
sorry.
you. Sorry. Cheers.
Yeah, sorry.
If you need a minute, we can get Sartak to play some more music.
Yes, please. Sorry.
No more music for now.
No, you're not going to even dance for us? No?
No.
Paddy looks ready. Paddy's ready to dance. No.
Sorry, I'm using my iPad, so I'm not sure about the setting. Just give me a second, please.
That's all right.
Sorry.
No worries. No worries at all.
Christina,
Yes.
one other option maybe to share the slides as a file in the chat section, and then we can open them on our screens.
Yeah. If that helps, or yeah.
If it helps.
I could also share them. Michelle,
Yes.
Do I have the most recent version?
Yes.
I could share them on my. Let me share, roughly speaking, the last one you.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, James. Sorry.
Just got to actually open it.
It's all right. We're all in suspense. It's okay.
It's a great slideshow, it really is.
The joys of technology, eh?
Absolutely.
There are some good things. At least we get to share. There we go. All right. Take it
Okay,
away.
sorry.
Don't worry.
Okay.
So as far as hit, Michelle, is that right?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you. Okay, so just to start with the brief introduction. So football is the most popular global sport around the world. Currently, there are more than 200 countries affiliated with FIFA, coming across 6 football confederations. So we aim to so some countries. Why are some countries? The question is, why are some countries better than others in football performance? So we aim to give an explanation for the observed variation in football performance. So we consider the economic factors and the sportness factors as well. Why performance is matter because it sometimes is related to bargaining right, or sometimes is related to the efficient use of resources. Also, it might related to institutional factors, what football structure in the country, and sometimes football performance is impacted by politics. So can
next slide.
Yes, please, sorry. So just to give you a quick look about the previous published research are done in this area. So the first paper is Wilton Sport Practice Go Hand in Hand by Epper. So another paper was assessing the FIFA ranking point, and they conclude that FIFA ranking points is indicator for country development. Also, the country wealth and population size might contribute to international success for both male and female soccer teams. Another paper by Zimanski is he also conclude that FIFA ranking of national teams depends negatively on population size and income. Another paper also, income and population have positive diminishing effect on football success. And last paper is they examined the African nation, and in the African sport performance is positively depends on GDP and population size compared to other variables that they used in the analysis. Sorry. So countries, also another published paper, so just to give you a quick look. Countries with better life condition and more resources have a higher ability to win more medals compared to developing countries with poor life conditions and less available resources, and this might be related to resource allocation. Population size was strongly correlated with football success, especially in Latin American countries. Another paper by Zimanski, they used the convergence model. Football helped the weaker teams to catch up with the better ones. And the last one is economic prosperity is positively associated with football resources acquisitions, which help to boost football performance. So in order for us to examine the factor that contribute to better football performance, we use the data from different sources. So the first one is Penward table version 9 for the GDP per capita and for the population. We used CIPRI.org for military spending data, football result collected from Kaggle, and country-specific football data like number of clubs and players obtained from the awardfootball.net. So I just a brief description about the data. The results so far is cover around 80 countries. It's unbalanced panel data across countries and years. Results cover the period of time between 1950 to 2014. For macroeconomic variables, GDP per capita, population size, and military spending was used. The main variables for the league data that were included in the analysis is the number of players, number of clubs, a number of competition, country experience, and total Summer Olympic game participation and total medals. So we used a linear regression model to explain the footballing performance across countries and the time years. We measure footballing performance by the proportion of matches won each year. So the first part of the analysis, just to give you a descriptive statistic for the data for the variables of interest. So the winning proportions is the dependent variable is between 0 and 1 is presented as proportion. We use the log GDP per capita and the log population. We use also the military spending as a share of GDP. Number of clubs, and there is a huge difference between countries. Some countries they have only one, and some countries they have more than 140 clubs. Also number of players, and it's also range between 1 and some countries they have more than 1,000 player. Number of competition between 1 and 31. And the total summer Olympic game is between 0 and 174. Total played matches between 1 and 32, and country experience between year, and some countries they have more than 800 years experience in playing football. Sorry, just James, can you skip this slide, please? Yes, thank you. So the result for the regression is we have significant positive effect for the GDP per capita and for the population. The coefficient value is significantly positive. There's no impact on military spending on football performance. Number of clubs and number of players has also significant positive impact. Other variables has range between negative. Some of the other variables they don't have any significant result, but for the total matches, it has a significant negative impact, and for the country experience as well. So just to summarize the result, richer countries win more matches, whereas poorer not. So and this might be related to the resources allocation, and they use the resources for basic essential needs. So more populous countries win more matches, and this might also relate it to the pool of talented players. Countries with more professional clubs and players win more matches. There's no effect, as I said, of military spending, of general sport is not like the total, the country experience and the total matches. So as I said before, this is the first chapter of my PhD thesis, and it's still under development. So we might also examine the change in some countries' regime, especially the political system. We might also expand the data coverage, especially amongst the league structure. We might also include more variables like domestic league structure impact, or to investigate the government expenditure on GDP and sport budget. So that's all for today. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Michelle. I'm glad we managed to get over the technical issues in the end.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thanks for the presentation. I do have some questions coming in. So the first one is from Sutik Kumar, who said, what do you think about Brazil's rise and then gradual decline in international football? And the reasons behind that, would they be economical or political or totally footballing?
It might be economics and political issues. Yes, because they still have the talented players, but maybe they don't have the proper conditions or the proper circumstances.
That's brilliant. Thank you. You also, your conclusions came out that richer countries win more matches, and you talked a little bit about resources. Could you expand a little bit about that?
It's just an assumptions that because countries like what is published in the previous research, like the poor countries, they use the resources to meet the essential needs like the food and educations. They consider it is more important like than playing football. You know my point.
Yeah. So was the analysis based on men's and women's football? Question from Beth Clarkson, or
we haven't included any data for women football. This is one of my aim in the future time.
Do you think there will be any differences in the data results?
Just to be honest, we could not find like a sufficient data for a long time period like the one that is available for the men football. So it might be difficult to get similar result because the time frame is basically different.
Brilliant. I've got a question from Gavin Price. Sorry. Do you think recent data, say the last 6 years, may paint a slightly different picture given the relative recent successes of smaller international nations like Croatia, Iceland, and Wales, who were recently ranked pretty highly in the FIFA rankings?
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, sorry. So obviously, in the last 6 years,
okay.
Do you think the data will be slightly different given we've seen success of some smaller nations like Croatia, Iceland, and Wales doing particularly well in the FIFA rankings?
Actually, I might consider to run separate analysis for these small nations, but as I told you, this is just my first chapters, and I'm still working on it.
No, that's great. Thank you. What do you think about countries where football is not the main sport? That's a question from Connell Vaughan. Do you think you would see differences in the data there?
Actually, that's why we include the sportness factors like the summer Olympic games, just to see if it has any impact, if some nations are they put the resources or the effort on more other sport or more other than football.
That's great. I've got a question with Conor Logue. I know you didn't look at women's football as much, but the question is, why do we see major success in women's soccer in the US compared to lower success in the men's team? And do you think the data can help us kind of work that one out?
Yeah, it might be helpful to look at the data. Yeah, we can use the data to find the difference between the US and other nations.
That's great. I've got a question from Gideon Jakar. He'd like you to expand a little bit on what matches were used for the proportion and results.
Is the total match for the national team for each country played in each year to get the winning proportion. So the matches is for the national team basically.
Okay.
For each country.
For each country. Yeah. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Yes.
From Jonathan Morris, did you investigate any correlation between the number of players participating in foreign leagues and the success of another team, say for example Belgium?
No, we haven't looked at that yet.
Do you think there'll be any correlation or perhaps negative correlation between a proportion of non-native players playing in national leagues such as the Premiership?
Actually, we are planning to include data on league structure, like the number of local players and foreigner players, but this is just in the future plan, so I haven't got any result now.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And that was my alarm telling me that time is up. And I think people would like lunch. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks a lot.
And your time. And as we have said before, if anybody has been interested in any of the research, please do contact the people involved. The whole idea of the Football Collective is to network and discuss beyond the realms of this, the confines of an online forum. So please do get in touch with one another and share ideas and help out, because this is what we're all about. I will pass you back to Sartak, who I'm sure has something to say before we close this session, and then we will be back after lunch. Sartak.
Thank you, Christina. It was a brilliant first session of the day after the keynote, and thank you for hosting the session. It went pretty smooth, and thanks to all the participants for presenting their brilliant piece of research ideas to us. So we will be back around in another 55 minutes for the start of next session, when Robbie Miller will be taking over as the chair. And before we go, I mean, if people want to go on break, they can go on. I guess Peter is still around.
Hi, Sartak.
Hello, Peter, one of my friends.
What a good morning that was. What a good morning. You must be really pleased with how that's gone.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with, and it was a really knowledgeable session as well to watch the brilliant.
Amazing. What a range of subjects.
So one of my colleagues from India, you can say, he has worked in the field of sports technology and has developed something around RFID for goal line technology. I guess Samrat is around. Hello, Samrat, are you around?
Yeah, I'm around.
So he basically wants to ask you a question. So only one question, basically. So I will pass on to Samrat. Samrat, if you can ask him, that will be perfect.
Hello, Peter. I
Hi,
hope
good
you
to
are
speak
doing
to you.
well in this challenge. Yeah, good to see you too. I hope you are doing well in this challenging times.
Thank you. I'm doing okay. Thank you. I hope you are too.
Yeah. So one thing I would like to ask you, like, you know, this current international football bodies like UEFA, FIFA, AFC, all these international bodies. So in a hypothetical situation, if you are given a chance to change how these international bodies work, one change maybe. So what you would suggest that you would have changed, like how they work currently?
Well, that is a huge question. I guess the one thing football, being a global sport, should aim towards is unity. So for me, without wanting to over-centralize and give perhaps one body too much power, the one ambition of football should be that we're all in it together. I think that is a bit, if I'm honest, I think that's a bit idealistic, because the nature of the industry is that it's competitive. So, for instance, within the English Premier League, there are 20 clubs who each have their own agenda and they're competing against each other. And yet they're part of a single entity which wants itself to be the strongest league in Europe or the world. And so the Premier League is in competition with the Bundesliga and La Liga and Serie A and the other major leagues in Europe. And Europe is overseen by UEFA. And UEFA might consider itself in competition with its equivalent in South America or North America or Africa or Asia. And so there is by definition in a competitive industry a lot of competition, and that is natural. But if I were to be the king of FIFA for one day, I guess as the body that oversees all of the world, right, my ambition would be to try to head towards a situation where we understand that football is only football because lots of us play it and lots of us watch it, and we are all in it together. So perhaps a greater degree of altruism would be an ambition.
Okay, thank you, Peter, for answering that. I will leave it to Sarthak.
Thank you. Really good to talk to you. Keep well.
Yeah, you too. Do well.
Well, thank you, everyone. And we had a brilliant first session. So we will now have around 50 to 55 minute break, when we will be back at 12:55 BST. And during this time, you are free to go away, have your lunch, have your tea, have some snacks, and be back at 12:55 for the rest of the session.
I still
Awesome.
The A is for my authority, which many players seem to question, thinking they're somehow going to make me change my mind. B is for babies, which a lot of managers cry like after a decision has not gone their way. C is for the continual criticism I receive from the touchline. Get back in your technical area. The D is for the dunderheads who seem to think we have a conspiracy against their particular team. E is for the eerie silence which echoes around the ground when I've booked a home team's player and it's obvious to everyone that he deserved it. F is the farce into which most games would descend if we weren't there. The G is for the gnarled face of someone who's on £90,000 a week and reckoned he should have had a throw-in. H is for handball, which has to be intentional, and very rarely is. If only people would study the rules more. I is for innocence, pleaded by many a doe-eyed defender after they've just side down that tricky winger. J is for jiu-jitsu, which I quite intend to display given a dark alley and some of the narky blurts I've encountered. The K is for the kissing of the badge. How ridiculous that looks 6 months later when they're at another club. L is for lip reading, of which you don't have to be an expert to see how odious some people are. M is for the mistakes we sometimes make. Surely a bit of controversy is part of the game's appeal. The N is for the numbskull who during the Boxing Day game asks me what else I got for Christmas besides my whistle. An afternoon with your wife, mate. The O is for offside, which many forwards tell me they simply could not have been. P is for the penalty shootouts. Great drama and no pressure on me. The Q is the quiet word which I sometimes need to have with some of the more fiery participants. I usually choose the word pleat. R is for running backwards, a difficult skill which the pundits never seem to appreciate. S is for the suggestion that I should have shown a card of some sort to a player who's just been awarded a free kick. Sorry, I got all that wrong. The S again. Okay, the S. The S is the suggestion that I should show a card to an opponent by a player who's been awarded a free kick. He himself is more in danger of getting one for that. T is for the 21-man brawl, which is basically an embarrassing scene of pushing and shoving. U is for the umpire, which I sometimes wish I'd been instead. You never hear a cricket crowd chanting, "Who's the bastard in the hat?" The V is for vitriol, vilification, vendetta, and volley of verbal abuse. Some good bird noises there, boy. W is for Walter Pigeon. There's Mr. Griffiths in How Green Was My Valley I may have started to sound like during this song. Where was the light I thought to see in your eye? He says that to a young Hugh played by Roddy McDowell. The X. The X represents the sarcastic kiss planted on my forehead by a swarthy Portuguese centre-half whom I just dismissed. The Y is for Yate, the kind of town that referees come from. And the Z. Well, the Z could be for Zidane, Zico, Zola, Zubi, Zareta, Zoff, even Zondervan, but is in fact for the zest with which we approach our work. Without this zest for the game, we wouldn't become refs, and without refs, well, zero. See also Zatopek, Zeus, and Seal Monaco. Have a caravan there. Static, naturally.
My heart was broken. My heart was broken. Sorrow, sorrow, sorrow, sorrow. My heart was broken. My heart was broken. You saw it, you cleaned it, you touched it, You see there, my tears are drying. My tears are drying. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. My tears are drying. My tears are drying. Your beauty and kindness make tears clear my blindness. While I'm working my room on the sun, I will be while the chief sunshine on me. I'll thank him for his work and your birth in my birth. Was broken, my heart was broken. Sorrow, sorrow, sorrow, sorrow. My heart was broken. My heart was broken. You saw it, you claimed it. You touched it, you saved it. While I'm running my room on the sun, I will be with you. While the chief sunshine on me, I'll thank him for his work and your work and my birth. Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
My lover's got no money, he's got his strong beliefs. My lover's got no power, he's got his strong beliefs. My lover's got no fame, he's got his strong beliefs. My lover's got no money, he's got his strong beliefs. Want more and more, people just want more and more freedom and love. What he's looking for, more and more. People just want more and more freedom and love. What he's looking for, freed from desire. Mind and senses purified, freed from desire. Mind and senses purified.